public meeting of the Falls Church Planning Commission. And for the past year almost, I'll start off by reading this notice. The meeting for which this agenda has been posted will be held pursuant to and in compliance with the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2-3708.2, and state and local legislation adopted to allow for continued government operation during the COVID-19 declared emergency. All participating members of the Planning Commission will be present at this meeting through electronic means. And I don't know if this part is actually correct tonight, but all members of the public are welcome to view the meeting at www.fallschurchva.gov/PC. Public comments will be accepted electronically until the end of the public hearing. Please submit comments via email to plan@fallschurchva.gov. And as always, just a quick reminder for my fellow commissioners, please make sure you have muted yourself as you talk. During discussions, I will use your mute status or the little raised hand feature in Microsoft Teams as indication that you have a comment. So stay muted unless you want to speak. And also a reminder that someone on staff may mute your microphone for you if they think you forgot to mute yourself. So before you speak, just quickly check to make sure you are not muted. Otherwise, we'll have the embarrassing thing that I do at least once per meeting, which is you're talking and you're muted. Everyone has to say you're muted. It's awkward. So don't let that be you. All right. With all of that out of the way, Ms. Bazemore, can you please call the roll?
Yes. Chair Rinkin.
Here.
Mr. Krasner.
I'm here.
Ms. Peets.
Here.
Mr. Puentes.
Here.
Mr. Stevens.
Here.
Ms. Weiss is absent tonight, and Ms. Comont.
Here.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for that. Rob, by the way, you were a little bit quiet, so if you start commenting later, we'll see how it goes. But before I get an adoption of the agenda, it has been suggested, and I think this is a great idea, that we rearrange things a little bit so that we tackle the work session item number 8, the Falls Plaza site plan application review, to occur after item 6A, but before item 6B. So if someone wants to make a motion to amend the agenda like that, that'd be great. And it's a little bit weird because it's a work session item in the middle of a public hearing, but you know what? It's a pandemic, so we're going to do it.
Yeah, so move, Mr. Chairman. I'll move that change.
All right. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second, Mr. Puentes. All right. Quick roll call vote, please, Ms. Bazemore.
Chair Rinkin.
Yes.
Mr. Krasner.
Yes.
Ms. Peets.
Yes.
Mr. Puentes.
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
And Ms. Comont.
Yes.
All right. Moving right along. Do not have a speaker tonight, so nothing for item 4. On to item 5. Do we have any petitions for items not on the agenda?
No.
Not. Great. On to item 6A, the Founders Row Special Exception Amendment relating to the theater condition. We talked about this a lot last time. I think this is going to be straightforward, but let's get an update from...
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm going to stay off camera for a moment here. Let me introduce the item briefly and then turn it over to Gary Fuller. So this item is before you for action. It's your recommendation to council. This is the same item as you all saw in your work session at your previous meeting. So with those highlights, let me go ahead and turn it over to Gary.
All right. Good evening, Gary Fuller, Planning. So this is our final public hearing on this. We're looking for make a final recommendation to the City Council. They'll be looking at this item and at their final public hearing next Monday on February 22nd. As Paul had said, we have discussed this in a previous work session, and that was held on February 3rd. We had a general discussion on it, presentation, PowerPoint, and we had some discussion on it, and generally everybody seemed to not have too many questions, and we were moving forward with this. So in terms of one change since then is on the wording on it, city attorney, and looking at the document and the VC changes, we wanted to clarify a little further the VC language that talked about the third-party escrow and how that works. And so there was some discussion along those lines, and we've decided to recommend some changes to that to kind of smooth it out. So that's something that is provided, and I'll highlight that in a minute. But anyway, so our recommendation tonight is to have this item recommending it, the proposed motion, the whereases are indicated. The planning commission would recommend approval of TR 2102. So I'm going to bring up now the other information. Just one second. All right, I now have it. There we go. Anyway, so I'm going to read this. So in terms of the verbiage that talks about the owner agrees that no more than 50% of the total resident units will be granted certificates of occupancy. That was struck out, and there was some new language, and that's in blue on your resolution. And the city attorney indicated that we thought the language would be a little improved if we were to say that the owner agrees that no more than 50% of the total residential units will be granted certificates of occupancy until either one, construction of the movie theater's tenant improvements are substantially underway, or B, the owner has entered into an escrow agreement and deposited the escrow funds as described below. And then the escrow funds shall be in the amount of $3,600,000 in cash in an escrow account with a third party, and so on as it read. So basically, it was a slight redoing to basically say either construction of a movie theater tenant improvements are substantially underway, or the owner has entered into an escrow agreement and deposited the escrow funds as described below. There really wasn't a clear trigger there, so we divided it up that way. So I'm giving you this in that this was something that was indicated post staff report, so you did not see this. But anyway, that's a slight change, and that's I just wanted to highlight that, and that'll be an edit that the council will see. So hopefully that wasn't too confusing, but since it did happen after the staff report, I just wanted to highlight that we are clarifying that area slightly. So that is my presentation. I'll turn this back over. I know Joe's probably here from Mill Creek. I don't know if he has anything to add. You had a full presentation last time, so I don't anticipate a presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Joe, if you want to add something, feel free, but I think unless, doesn't seem like anything's changed since last time. Does anyone have any questions? Commissioners, Mr. Stevens?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a question. Maybe it's more just context and background. I mean, I'm still basically in support of this, as consistent with our last meeting. But I was just wondering that this is from the justification letter of Mill Creek. Since the 50% occupancy restriction condition that the voluntary concession is I'm quoting here, a draconian double-edged sword that hurts everyone involved. Just curious why it was agreed to put that in the original voluntary concession.
Sorry, Mr. Stevens, there was some background noise there. I think you were referencing the fact that half the building would be empty at this point in time, and that being a double-edged sword.
Right, but that was in the 50% occupancy restriction was in the voluntary concessions.
Yeah, well, and I actually think I said this last time. I don't think that the concept is a bad one. I think that its implementation today, given everything that we know in the historic circumstances surrounding the movie theater industry, just does make it a double-edged sword. We will not be able to have a theater open at that 50% mark. 2 years ago, when we did discuss that and debate that and put that in, there was no way of seeing anything like this happening. So I think that, hindsight is that's clearly a benefit of hindsight. I think in principle it made sense at the time, but today it just doesn't. And we would all be faced with a 50% empty building for some time as we try to get a theater open.
Okay, so just basically, things changed in such a dramatic way that it wasn't foreseen at the time that you negotiated that particular voluntary concession with the city.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think that movie theater, grocery store, whatever the tenant is, to anticipate that the entire industry would be on its backside, trying to get back up was just, it wasn't even in the realm of thought. Even if Studio Movie Grill had gone bankrupt for whatever reason, which again, nothing portended that given their financial situation up until last year, backfilling it should not have been a problem. We just find ourselves in a completely unique and historic situation.
Okay, that's all I had, Chair.
All right, thanks, Tim. Anyone else have any questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go for it.
the only thing I would bring up, and it's more just, due to the fact that we don't have live public comment, but we did receive a letter in this week's package from VPIS. Has Mr. Muffler seen that letter? Staff, did the applicant?
I have. I received it last night.
Okay, and I guess I'm not advocating pro or against what's in the letter, but the author, who is the president of that organization, raises certain issues, suggests certain changes that they, in their opinion, and I guess because they can't be here in person to speak, because our hearings are all virtual. If you would have any reaction to that letter and some of the suggestions that are in that letter.
Sure. No, and I appreciate the concerns and the feedback. And candidly, I mean, this is not the first time we've received this feedback. I'd say many of these conditions and thoughts were discussed with city staff. Ultimately, what I fall back on, and I commend city staff on this, as well as the mayor during our initial work session. The goal of this, everyone was united in a goal of how do we get a movie theater to the city of Falls Church, right? Like, we don't necessarily need to be punitive to the developer. We don't want to make this more difficult for anyone. We just want a movie theater. And to that end, I think we've crafted a situation whereby Mill Creek's feet are held to the fire, as we have detailed. I don't need to go into that more unless required. Mill Creek's feet continue to be held to the fire, while we also, aren't sitting there with a half-empty building, which jeopardizes the success of the entire project for everyone. So I understand that there are some more punitive actions recommended in this letter. I am very thankful that staff and council and planning commission have seen it to be that this is not a situation to be punitive. It's to work together to find the best outcome possible. And again, I think that the terms that we have established, over $3.5 million locked up until a theater is in place, is a very substantial commitment above and beyond our ownership of the property.
Right, and I think, I mean, in general, I mean, I think I agree with you. I think the letter seems to characterize that this is, the city gains, loses, gives up and, everything in this and gains nothing. And I mean, I personally don't view it that way. I think that, again, there's something to be said for keeping the project viable. And I don't view the escrow as trivial. But I do think also that, this type of risk was probably not something that, an organization like, or an outfit like Mill Creek would have ever put into their pro formas and spreadsheets and projections. Something like what's happened in that industry, I think, would have been nearly impossible for anyone to sort of, account for or predict. So anyhow, but I just wanted to get that out there for a response, and I appreciate that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Kaiser. Any other questions or comments from the commission? I think if there aren't any other questions or comments, I would entertain a motion.
If I could step in for just a moment, Mr. Chair, this is advertised as a public hearing.
Yes, I always forget that part. Ms. Bazemore, any comments from the public?
No, I have not received any.
So in my defense, we've been doing this almost a year and we've received 0 comments from the public, which is why I usually forget to ask, but it is important to ask. So no comments from the public, unfortunately. Mr. Point says you unmuted.
Don't the VPA's comments count?
Sure. I just meant like emailed in during our meeting, those kinds of comments. But yes, we've gotten plenty of correspondence, and that's been appreciated for sure. All right, if there is no additional comments from the public, there is a proposed motion in the staff report if someone wants to take a stab at that.
Mr. Chairman, I'll do it. I'll make the motion on this one because I've been a little vocal on it. I think that, again, it's in the city's best interest to, as I just said, to keep the project viable. And I think that this is a reasonable allowance for a change, given truly unprecedented circumstances. I know the word unprecedented gets tossed around a lot. And I've heard developers, use that word sometimes in the past where maybe it was a hyperbole, but I think, again, looking at certain industries and the way they've been affected over the last 12 months, I think, the theater industry is up there. They're not the only ones, but they're certainly in a relatively small group of industries that have been truly hit hard by what this pandemic has prevented people from being able to do, like sitting together in large groups, in a movie. So, so with that, I will make the motion. Okay, so the resolution is to amend resolution 2018-37 to change the approved voluntary concessions, community benefits terms and conditions dated August 10th, 2018 to provide for escrow security for the theater use instead of withholding residential certificates of occupancy for the project known as Founders Row on application by Mill Creek Residential Trust, also known as Founders Row Holding LLC. Whereas an application for special exception amendment and related revision to the approved voluntary concessions, community benefits, terms and conditions dated August 10th, 2018 for the Founders Row mixed use development has been submitted by Mill Creek Residential Trust, Founders Row Holding LLC, pursuant to the procedures set forth in sections 4890, 45455, special exceptions of the city code. And whereas Mill Creek Residential Trust submitted a narrow application under the approved special exception to amend the previously accepted voluntary concessions, community benefits, terms and conditions, specifically the commercial theater condition, to place tenant fit out funds in a third-party escrow account in lieu of withholding residential certificates of occupancies. And whereas the Planning Commission finds that the limited proposed changes and amendment to the voluntary concessions, we find those to be reasonable in the marketplace and consistent with the previous Founders Row project approvals, objectives, and that there are no other changes, including but not limited to the mixed-use projects, land uses, development program, conceptual development plan, and site plan.
Yeah.
Now therefore I move that the planning commission recommend approval of TR 21-02 to city council for public hearing and action on February 22nd, 2021. That's the motion.
Thank you. Can I get a second from anyone?
I'll second.
Thank you for Ms. Teets. Any additional thoughts or comments before we vote on this motion?
I'd like to make a quick comment.
Sure.
So for the last, 5 years till this fall, I worked for the Trade Association for Amusement Parks and water parks, attractions equipment. And it is unprecedented. So some of our members are some of the largest amusement companies in the world. I think you know the one with the mouse. And these are companies that study the industry. They study all these kinds of things, and no one expected this level of shutdown. So, I totally get where the movie companies are coming from, because it is unprecedented. This is not something that anyone expected to have happen at this level. So I just want to point that, I think that people think that risk analysis is going to look that far out of the box is wrong. I mean, they look at things that have happened in the past, and we haven't had anything like this. They look at the 08, 09 shutdown of the economy there that, this couple years. They look maybe further back to some of the other slowdowns, but no one expected something like this.
Yeah, it's been, as we all know, hard to fathom.
It really is. And I no longer work for that trade association because we had to cut half the positions and they lost $37 million. So it is. But anyway, I work for another company that has lots of money. So I'm okay.
Good. Glad that worked out. All right. Unless there's any other comments, Ms. Bazemore, could you call a vote?
Yes. Chair Rankin,
Yes.
Mr. Krasner,
Yes.
Ms. Dietz,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
and Ms. Coleman.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that. And now I'm realizing, what did we technically do? We switched. Are we doing, Paul, help me out. Should we do Paul's Plaza now, or did we want to do any of this other stuff?
I think it looks like the team for Falls Plaza is here, so I think we can go ahead and get started with that one, and then I think we can pick up with the CIP immediately after that.
All right, that sounds great.
right.
So I'll let you introduce this, please.
Sure. Let me introduce it briefly before I turn it over to the case planner, Jeff Holland, for his report. This item before you is it's an administrative site plan application, administrative site plan amendment application for the Falls Plaza Shopping Center, which is at the corner of Broad Street and Haycock, out on the west end of the city, and currently includes the giant grocery store as well as a number of restaurants and other uses. This is, as I said, an administrative site plan application, so staff is planning to take final action on it, and that's scheduled for tentatively the end of March. Staff did still want to bring this to you, certainly for your information, but also for your review and thought and input. So at this point in the application, there's been one round of review. Staff has called out those key items that we've communicated to the applicant, as well as a variety of technical items that are common at this stage in the review. But maybe before I go too far, I'll actually just go ahead and turn it over to Jeff for the report. Jeff?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeff Holland with the planning staff. Thanks, Paul. Yep, this is a administrative site plan amendment being brought to you. Like Paul said, we have already gone through one full review of our first submission of the application. I'll just run through some of the key comments that were brought up by staff in this submission. First was some recommendation to add trees and islands throughout the parking area to strengthen green infrastructure and provide tree canopy. Second would be a recommendation to marked pedestrian and bicyclist route through the alleyway shown in the site for a greater connection to the high school and the West Falls Church sites. There's a recommendation to add more crosswalks throughout the site that bring pedestrians from the parking lot to the main anchor stores. Our city arborist has brought up that you would like to see the inclusion of native and non-invasive species of shrubbery and landscaping throughout the site. There are opportunities to improve bus stops along West Broad to be more in line with the city's bus stop master plan. And let's see here, this application is also being done while we look at a facade work being done through a building permit and comprehensive sign package application. So we would like to see that those go through Planning Commission and BZA approval as well. Just to go over what is being introduced on the site, we have various landscaping enhancements such as retaining walls, vine trellises, curb edge planters, and landscape beds. There's also a series of bicycle and pedestrian improvements like crosswalks, ADA ramps and curb cuts, bike racks, and more pedestrian access from Haycock and Broad, that intersection. There's also vehicular traffic improvements like pickup and drop-off zones, as well as the removal of some curbing, to maintain drive aisles to the site. And there's also a lot of proposed site amenity improvements along the front of the site, like litter receptacles, benches and bench walls, a lot of lighting, tables, fireplace, and heating for the seating areas. This project is now under our West End Small Area Plan, which was approved last fall. So the West End Small Area Plan does have a series of strategies that we believe that this project checks the boxes for. Enhancing existing tree canopy, prioritizing safe pedestrian spaces, providing opportunities to sit and hang out, and encouraging restaurants to use outdoor dining areas. This project was seen very early on before they submitted in December. It was seen by the AAB, who took positively on the application. They saw both the site plan amendment application and also the work being done under the facade work being done under the building permit application. They have seen all of this, and they have looked pretty positively on it. They will see the comprehensive sign package next month, hopefully. Just earlier tonight, I was with the Urban Forestry Group and just going over quickly this project. They also thought it was a positive change. They did have a few comments, but I'll be coordinating with them to get that in writing and passed on to the applicant. And like Paul said, we're looking for a second submission here at the beginning of March with administrative action at the end of the month, if everything is all set to go. So with that, I can turn it over to Antoinette to present the project.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Jay Brinson with Brett, and he's going to, and Deirdre Johnson, with Brett to start us off.
Great, thanks, Antoinette. I don't have the presentation. I'm hopeful that someone has it handy. There we go. Great. So before we get into that, I thought we'd just take a few minutes to just provide a little backdrop to the nature of the improvements, the intention here, and kind of what we do at Federal Realty with these types of projects. We own several properties throughout the Metro DC area, and Federal Realty's owned Falls Plaza now for, I think, going on 50 years. We're not your typical developer. We are a long-term property owner. We've been in Falls Church obviously for a very long time, and this is part of what we do in terms of reinvestments in our assets and to improve them over time. And what I'd like to do is just maybe have Deirdre Johnson speak to that. She's our Vice President of Asset Management, and she's spearheading a lot of the improvements we're making throughout the state of Virginia to help provide a little context for how we've approached this this project.
Deirdre, if you're talking, you're muted.
Let me see. I saw her on, so.
She had unmuted at one point, but she's on the list of people in the meeting.
Let me shoot her a quick
I
text.
think I figured it out.
Oh, there
we
you
go.
I'm here. we are Microsoft Team novices, so please forgive us.
No worries.
But yeah, we are so excited to be here before you tonight. I just can't even begin to tell you. And we are long-term, I'll call us neighbors, you know, more than community partners, more than developers. Like, I feel like we're neighbors. We bought what I'll call Falls Plaza West in 1967. And then we subsequently purchased Falls Plaza East in 1972. So we've been here a long time. We plan to be here for even a longer time. And that's why we take so much pride and have so much excitement about what we're about to show you tonight. Because we love Falls Church and we love Falls Plaza. And to give you some context, we actually, Jay and I have been working on this, you know, for months and months and months, and we had a vision on how to take the, you know, farm style, intimate, warm presence of Falls Plaza and give it some modern day aesthetics. And right in the middle of COVID in July, we went before our investment committee to get approval for this investment at a time when, you know, merchants, you know, some of them weren't open. Certainly sales, you know, were deeply depressed and rents weren't coming in. And we were just very passionate about being able to ask the investment committee to approve this investment. It's the right place. It's the right time. It's the right partnership with a city government. And that makes a big difference when you have partners like the City of Falls Church who are equally passionate about, you know, elevating the city, having it be a model for any city across the United States. And we were able to make that presentation, and the company from the top down to the bottom are with us in this and are just, you know, equal partners in this. So I just want to thank the city, the planning commission, the city council, just economic development. Everybody that we've touched has been nothing but just a pleasure to work with. So we're excited tonight, and we're hoping that we'll be able to take some of your ideas and questions and be able to implement them into the project and keep looking forward.
Thanks, Deirdre. So I'm going to walk the commission through just the presentation. It's essentially the same presentation we gave to the AAB, just to help you better understand the scope of the project. But just to, as Jeff indicated, it's an administrative application where we're not adding any square footage or changing any uses or making any major modifications to the shapes of the buildings. We're making aesthetic improvements and site and landscape improvements to improve the customer experience and to elevate, hopefully to elevate long-term the perception of the center, both locally and then within the region. So that's really the objective for what we're doing here. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to advance to the next slide, if you could. We've, as you'll see, we're going to run through the improvements from the west end, kind of area 1, across to the east side of the property. And I'll move more quickly as we go through, because you'll see a kind of a repeating set of themes in the styles of architecture and the types of improvements that we're making. So we can go to the next slide. And over on the left side in the images, you see some of the existing photos. This is the corner at the giant entrance off of Haycock. We're going to be improving that stairwell coming down off of Haycock in the entranceway coming down from that direction, adding some formalized drop-off areas. It's a little bit informal right now. We're going to be formalizing that drop-off area. And then as you move across, and I don't know if you can, hopefully you can see my pointer. I'm pointing at it myself, but actually you probably can't. But as you move across toward the entrance where the giant is, that's where we start to actually expand the sidewalk southward into the existing parking lot. And if we go to the next slide, you'll get a sense of what we're starting to do aesthetically. Again, maintaining the square footage of the building, but really making a change to the roof form, modernizing it to that modern farmhouse style approach, changing the roof type from a shingled roof to a standing seam metal roof. We think that's just going to have a dramatic impact on the quality or the perception of the center and really elevate it aesthetically. And then using a lot of the vertical wood slats within the gables to really create that nice approach. It's going to be a lot of paint going on the bricks, not a complete whitewashing of the bricks. We're working hard to work on a technique with our contractor LF Jennings to allow a lot of that brick red to kind of bleed through the white, so it gives a little bit of that distressed look, and we think we've got that nailed down. But we'll see that theme happen throughout the presentation. We'll go to the next slide. And then as you move across, you see significant improvements to the giant facade, really changing the roof lines dramatically as you go across, adding that gabled parapet on the very west end will be, I think, a big improvement, really improved visibility for giant from Haycock. And then we move down. We can go to the next slide. This slide's important for you to see, and I'm gonna, I don't know if I can mark up on this screen or not. Let me see. Like we said, we're not novices with Teams here, so apologies for that. But you could, you'll see there's a little purple squares in the center of this, along the sidewalk there. That's where the existing columns are, and that's where the existing sidewalk effectively ends, where those planters are. We are expanding the sidewalk out into the parking lot, and this change really is going to be a dramatic improvement. We really want to facilitate pedestrians moving from the west end of Falls and from the new development that we coming up in the school site, and help facilitate moving pedestrians more easily across and through the center. So we're expanding out that sidewalk. That's a dramatic shift. We have a significant impact on the parking at the center. We've reduced about 27 parking spaces from the current condition. A significant number of them, over half of that reduction's happening on this side out in front of Giant. We've gotten great cooperation from our tenants with regard to those parking reductions, but we thought that was a really important move for us to really try to expand out the public spaces and the cafe seating areas for our tenants. To improve the outdoor dining experiences, to improve the pedestrian experiences, and then to really accentuate all of those improvements with significant landscape upgrades throughout the center, which are going to be happening on the islands and along the sidewalk improvements throughout the center. Go to the next slide. Deirdre alluded to how we're integrating a little bit of a modern approach in with the modern farmhouse, and you can see below is the current picture, and above is what it will look like when we're done. So you get the modern farmhouse aesthetic on the bookends here, but in the center we've introduced some wood and some metal and some steel to create a little bit of a more modern feel to that, to help elevate the signage and branding opportunities for our tenants. So we really like the way this feels and love the job that the Cooper Carey team has done to help bring this aesthetic forward for us. Next slide. As you move to the very east side of the west end of the center, which is right at the intersection of Birch, you'll see on the left is kind of the existing, depicts the existing site condition, and on the right-hand side is what we're proposing. And this is kind of out in front of the Starbucks and the Plaza Grill area. We are adding a significant retaining wall area. Again, expanding that sidewalk south and shifting the drive aisle slightly south and reducing some of the parking along that stretch, but creating a really formalized outdoor seating area for our tenants in this area is going to be a really important component, and maintaining the handicap accessibility and the pedestrian through traffic adjacent to the buildings. Is what the improvement that's happening in this location. That we think is going to be a really dramatic improvement with significant new furniture, heating, and outdoor heating for the outdoor seating. It's going to be, I think, a really great improvement for the center. We'll go to the next slide. As you move across to the east side, out in front of the CVS, again on the left side is kind of the existing, is the image of the existing site conditions. On the right, you start to see some of the improvements that we're making, particularly the improvements along the landscaping, and particularly in the alleyway between the CVS and the area that moves to the back of the center. There's an small existing image in the upper left that kind of depicts what that alleyway looks like today. We've got a tenant that has an entry back there, and we've got another tenant that's considering space down in that basement in the back. So we're really going to work hard to make some dramatic improvements, improve visibility, improve lighting, and add some seating and landscaping to make that comfortable and to draw people back and to help that become a more formal place for people to go and access some of the tenants we hope to get in. The next page, please. This just gives you a look at the down Birch Street facing north. So you've got the the names of the tenants on here are just depictions of the upper part, but the CVS on the right-hand side, and then you've got the area on the left where the Starbucks and the Plaza Grill are currently located. That gives you a good sense of what that center is going to feel like going forward when we get done. Again, largely retaining I think staying true to a lot of the current architecture, but really modernizing it, maintaining the cupola, but adding and just changing the finish aesthetic to it and modernizing that. One big change that currently has like I guess I'll call it kind of a kiosk or something along those lines blocking it, where that's going to go away and be replaced with a metal sign band and a trellis over that area, which will really elevate the entry to that alleyway. Next slide. And just a couple of 3D renderings of what it'll start to feel like as you walk down the center. Images obviously in front of the Starbucks and the Plaza Grill area at the top, and then that gives you a sense of what it feels like underneath the canopy as we replace the wood soffits and elevate the wood soffits underneath the building and improve that lighting, and really hopefully it'll be a really great feel for customers. And we'll see improvements to to many of the storefronts will be upgraded as part of this renovation as well, in addition to updating the finishes that'll happen and the surrounding the storefronts as well. Next slide, please. We're almost done. So again, a few images of the depictions in the alleyway and the opportunities for public art in that alley. We're going to be pursuing that vigorously to really, again, hopefully brighten up that area back there with all the lighting and FF&E and landscaping improvements, and getting what we think will be a really great addition to the center. And next slide. And then one of the bigger improvements we're making is on the east side of the center. There's an area of about currently has about, I want to say 12 or 15 head-in parking spaces. We're going to eliminate those and expand out both a combination of public seating and seating for cafes, for cafe seating for restaurants. So that'll create a really great outdoor seating area and public gathering space we hope will really elevate the center. This is where the fireplace feature is going to be installed. And we're also creating some parallel parking for quick drop off as people, and we're doing that across many of our centers in the country, but that pickup drop off parallel parking spaces that we're proposing are really intended to help facilitate a lot of the changes in people's shopping habits we've been seeing, particularly over the past year. And then throughout this side of the center, again, landscaping upgrades throughout many of the parking islands. Next slide. And just again, kind of you see how on the top half of the screen, the architecture is being carried across from identically from what we did on the west end over here. Next slide. And then here, this is the area above the in the top, the area around where the fireplace will be located, and it gives you a sense of how we're adding some of that modern feel with the steel and the painted brick and the wood being integrated in with the modern farmhouse touches that'll be happening on kind of the bookends of this section. And if we move to, I think, the last few slides, the next slide shows the Staples on Kids First Swim section of couple of 3D graphics of what that new outdoor space is going to feel like with the landscaping. That's a great place for people to come and gather. Next page, next slide. And okay, yep, we can go to the next slide. That one's a little boring. And then just at the end of it, you see how we again, minor modifications to the roof form, adding the new stainless, or not stainless, the new metal roof, and then illuminating the dormers at the top to help modernize that center. And then I think we just got a couple more images left. Next one, please. And this is showing along the back of the center. We're going to be working hard to clean up this back side of the center, be improved lighting, changing out many of the doors, improving the signage for the tenant and the back of house signage back here, and then really just cleaning up and painting what's happening back there as well. So there's and consolidating, particularly on the east side of the center and the rear of that, consolidating. We've got multiple trash enclosures. We're going to be working to consolidate those into one location to help brighten up and clean up that area in the back. Next page. This is just on this is a little bit more of the shot on the back, but what we're planning to do again to clean that area up in the back to make it feel much brighter and cleaner and safer than it does today. And next image. And then just up at the corner of Haycock and Broad, we've got some signage and some new branding that's going to be going on up at that center, and really just improving the landscaping at that corner up in the front as well. I think that's our last slide of images. So before we kind of move on, I'm going to let Antoinette kind of walk through next steps in our approach to, addressing the comments. We as a team went through the comments that the staff provided today, and we'll be working hard to get our responses back on those in the coming weeks. But maybe we should pause there and see if there are questions or comments, because we really do want to hear the priorities of the commission to help inform our responses.
Yes, thank you. Hi, this is Antoinette Isherwood with Walter Phillips, and I did want to just touch on a couple of the site plan items that we typically discuss when we do bring a site plan forward to the Planning Commission. One, we aren't requesting any additional waivers on the site. Kind of as you saw throughout the presentation, the scope of work is pretty limited. A lot of it is mainly for facade renovations, and we're just making some pedestrian improvements. So we aren't really touching the perimeter of the site either. And then the second point we wanted to make, we are decreasing overall the impervious area on the site. We're increasing some of the landscape island areas, trying to decrease the width of the drive aisles in some areas by bumping out those pedestrian spaces and creating a wider sidewalk. Overall, there is a decrease in about 27 parking spaces. A lot of them is for that addition of outdoor dining area over on the east end, and where we're eliminating the head-on parking spaces adjacent to the building. We are still meeting the required parking for the shopping center, so we're not requesting any parking reduction or waivers there either. And just overall, there are improvements to the existing site landscaping, kind of cleaning up of all the existing islands throughout the parking lot. And then just as Paul and Jeff have already mentioned, the building permit's currently under review. We are planning on resubmitting to address the comments from staff at the beginning of March. There's going to be an AB meeting on or around March 10th. There is a comprehensive sign package that's being reviewed. And then the staff is going to go through administrative action at the end of March. And that's all we have.
All right. Thanks, Antoinette, and everyone else for that presentation. I appreciate it. I see Mr. Stevens has his pretend hand up.
He does. Yeah, should I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, well, there's a lot that's very positive here. On the last point on the parking, I certainly have no problems with the reduction in spaces for improving the pedestrian experience as you've outlined. So I think that's an excellent trade-off in the current environment. One thing I wanted to ask you about are charging stations, electric charging stations. The city is very actively supporting the transition to electric vehicles. A number of our residents have them, and you probably have seen the charging stations at City Hall, very prominently positioned there. Now, I saw in one of the documents, it was C-0203, it showed a Volta charge station, but I was just wondering if you had any details on how many charge stations were being proposed and the location.
Sure. Deirdre, do you want to handle that, or you want me to take it? It's up to you.
Well, we are working with a company called Volta on adding charging stations to Falls Plaza. We absolutely think that that is the direction of, not only what we should be doing as a good community partner, but also it's the direction of the company. It's a good decision, and so we're excited about that, and it's something that we're doing across our Virginia portfolio, and I feel like it's an important component of what we should be doing in Falls Church.
Well, I would certainly encourage that, and especially if you can put in conduit,
yeah,
landscaping. That way it's not as expensive, but you're positioning yourself so that as demand increases and more people get electric vehicles, that it then won't be very expensive to put in the actual chargers. I very much liked the thought that was in the staff memo about using that service alley behind the buildings as a bike path, kind of a second connection from the D. So, I would strongly encourage staff to do what is possible to see that happens, and connection with that to bring the number of bicycle racks. I bike to that location all the time, but it's always very difficult. I wind up having to lock my bike up around a post, a post or something like that, rather than an actual bike rack. So as you're modernizing the facades, it'd be great to bring the bike racks up to current standards as well. Just one last comment on the electric charging stations. I noticed in the staff memo from Kate Walker that she identified several different possible sources that could give you grant funding for especially the fast charging stations. So we've already had one of the businesses in the city take full advantage of that. And that may well be something that could enhance your renovation even more. So that's pretty much all that I have, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Stevens. Mr. Puentes, you have your hand raised. You can go.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're coming through loud and clear now.
Thank you. I associate myself with a lot of Mr. Stevens' good comments. I was really excited to see this come through. I really thought this was a chance we could fundamentally remake, what is pretty much a 100% auto-oriented retail area. Doesn't really fit with the rest what we're doing with the rest of the city. So I think there's a lot of potential here to do really good things in shifting that from the auto orientation that it is now to something else. And again, Mr. Stevens hit on a lot of things I was going to say. I also too was very glad to see the parking reductions. If you want waivers, I'd be amenable to that. I would love to see kind of shifting away from all the parking that's there now to encouraging other modes. I know the staff report talked about ped and bike access. It's also a real corridor for kids biking to the high school and to the center there. I know we're making improvements to the bike path and up and down Haycock, but I still think this is going to be a prime area where kids cut through. I agree with Mr. Stevens about the EVs. And I would like to also make sure to heed to the staff's comments about the bus stops. We haven't talked about that today. I know that the bus, that was part of the staff's comments to address what is really not a great environment right now for transit in that strip. So looking forward to seeing what you're going to do on those. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fuentes. Ms. Coma, you have a comment? Question?
I do. Thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation. I agree. It's really exciting. I grew up shopping at the Giant and spent a lot of time at the Falls Plaza. So I'm excited to see it be refreshed. And I think what you have is a really great plan. I just want to second Mr. Stevens and Mr. Puente's comments about the bike lane and just general support for ped and bike access. I think that access to the high school, middle school campus is a real pain point, and for the city, and that shopping center would offer a really great route for students. Through the back is probably the best route so that we don't have conflicts with other vehicles in the front. But if there's any way that we could remove more parking spaces and have like a visible bike path in the front, that would be terrific. I see that lot is often very underparked. And we're trying to encourage other modes of transportation. I also wanted to just applaud your interest in providing some space for public art or some sort of a mural in various locations. I think giving that sense of place is really important. And I'd also like to request additional bike racks. I think I saw 1 or maybe 2 new bike racks on the plan, but I think more would be great. And then an earlier version of the presentation had pedestrian access at Broad and Haycock. Is that an idea that you moved away from? I didn't see that in this current presentation.
Yeah, we got where budget is tight, and that was one that we could not keep in the project. So that did have to go away before we got to our final submission.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks for those comments. Any other planning commissioners have anything to say? I have a couple of comments. First of all, just for clarification, and this might be a question for staff, but I think it's totally fine. This is a administrative site plan review, but what would have triggered a site plan review for us? More disturbed land or expanded footprint? I'm just curious what triggers planning commission site review.
Yeah, there are a couple triggers involved. A certain amount of land disturbance is what triggers a site plan requirement. What elevates it to a planning commission review, a requirement for planning commission review, is an increase in the amount of building square footage. I think it's if you add more than 50 square feet or some nominal amount, that triggers a review by the planning commission.
Right, and in this case, there's Am I back? I was frozen.
Yep, you're back.
All right, I have this one will be easy. I think a few years ago, I feel like we approved some sort of cell phone facility going on the roof. I assume that's still, if it ever went in, still hidden behind the new roof line.
Yes, John Boyle had us, this is Antoinette. John Boyle had us make sure that that was maintained.
Cool. I expected as such. And then overall, I think Rob mentioned this. I mean, I'll be honest. This is a very auto-oriented place, and I had dreams of it being completely redeveloped into a pedestrian-oriented place, especially with the stuff going on at the high school site. And so when this came in, I kind of was like, this looks really cool, but man, it means probably we're a ways off from a more significant renovation. But I understand. I think Giant has some crazy long lease and all this other stuff. So I applaud the efforts being made, and I don't want to be negative just because of that. But that was definitely my first reaction. Was like, man, I wish they would just give up on this thing and reconfigure the whole thing. But I will say that if there is any way to make a safe and effective bicycle route through the site, first of all, it sounds like commissioners would be happy to give you parking spaces to do it if that is somehow an issue. But that would be a huge thing, both for the high school, but also just that big new development that's going next door. So I don't know. In the back, it's pretty cramped, and you got delivery vehicles and stuff like that. And out front, you have all those cars parking. So I don't know, but if you came up with something creative and cool, you would be heroes, I would think. But overall, it looks great. I mean, I think everyone is in favor of trading parking spaces for better pedestrian experience. I think the outdoor dining spots are just brilliant. Even before COVID, I felt like the places with good outdoor dining were a lot more successful than the places that didn't have it. So 2 thumbs up from me. But anyone else have any other comments or questions before we let these guys go?
I have one last thing I wanted to say. I just wanted to second the staff recommendation for additional trees and the use of native species, wherever you can. They're hardier, they'll do much better, and they're better for our environment.
I concur. All right, well, if there's nothing else, we'll let you guys go, and I appreciate the presentation. I think we all enjoyed it.
Thank you very much
for your
Appreciate
comments, and yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, well, good luck.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right, back to what was originally item 6B on our agenda, which is the fiscal year 2022-2026 CIP, which we tackled a little bit last time, and I think the goal is to take action on it tonight. So with that, Paul, I'll let you probably hand it off to Cindy, but go for it.
Yeah, I have a brief update that this is before you for your action, which of course is a recommendation to council on the CIP for the upcoming term. This was before you as a work session item at your previous meeting. And as you suggested, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over at this point to Deputy City Manager, Ms. Mester.
Thank you, Mr. Stoddard, and good evening, Chair and Commissioners. I'm glad to be back with you to do the more formal CIP presentation this evening. And I am, as indicated, looking for motion and action. And so you do have in the staff report a proposed motion that we can come back to confirm is written the way you desire and if any amendments are needed. My thought is that I will go through the PowerPoint that Emily has kindly put up on the screen for us this evening, which will walk through key highlights from the staff report and the additional attachments we've provided, as well as highlight some of the key things that are in the actual CIP notebook, which this year for the majority of our folks are electronic, and I appreciate the ability to be green and electronic, but also just helped with our logistics being remote work. That said, if as we go through this process and you go through the council, or you just want a hard copy to make it an easier reference tool, we are glad to print out and provide that. So with that, Emily, if you could go to the next slide. I'm going to highlight a few things that we did talk about February 3rd, and then spend most of the time talking about some key issues today around policies, funding sources, where are some of the new projects, some more information on the equity lens, and then lead up to any additional questions or comments and request the adoption. Just for the record and to summarize what we did cover on the February 3rd work session, we spent most of our time talking about the existing projects so that the commission could be current with where we are with things you've approved in the past, and a lot of good progress. And I am really pleased and proud of our staff for continuing to do a lot of good work through a very challenging year that had to change how we worked in the field and do projects, but we are really accomplishing a lot. Also able to step up and still develop new projects and move us to the point where we could be presenting this CIP, which remains robust and a commitment to reinvest in our community with the public sector portion that can complement items that you're hearing tonight and have taken action on in terms of the commercial private sector. So to that extent, we did spend some time talking about the existing projects through the snapshot. We did update you on neighborhood traffic calming, and we are very pleased that over the last year we have been able to clear the queue for a lot of the pending projects. And while not all are done, as you saw in the reports and the attachment with the more detailed presentation from Zach Bradley, that those that are not done yet are one, because we have the federal large grant and we're now kicking that off, or we're really good in the community engagement pieces and moving forward. We introduced the operating cost calculator that we're starting to develop, and based on positive reaction from the commissioners 2 weeks ago, we will continue to develop that. And I also shared the council budget guidance. You kind of knew the financial framework, but also their commitment to capital investment. And as we move on into the meeting, I do want to acknowledge we have several of the key CIP staff with us this evening, but not all. But I do have some support to answer questions. So we have Ali Kavari, who's our CIP manager, Caitlin Sobsey, who is our grants manager and very instrumental in bringing a lot of this material to you this evening. And we have Zach Bradley, Public Works Director. Next slide, Emily. Just to reinforce for the record and the public, we are continuing to commit to the goals that are on the screen for reinvesting in our community infrastructure, making sure we're prioritizing the 6-year need. But as you know, we've added that 10-year long view, and each year we're able to flesh out those out 4 years a little bit more. We continue to work to align the actual project delivery to staff resources, because as you know, we had a lot of grants and projects, but we're slow on delivering, and especially in the transportation area. So we've really worked to align that and, of course, ensure, per the city charter, maintaining the financial strength, which is a key role for the Planning Commission, both to ensure consistency with the comprehensive plan as well as the financial feasibility. Next. So the big picture, what is this CIP that's before you? Of course, this chart is pretty intense, and that's why you have the notebook, so you can see it in full screen. And I will note that it is on the website as well for the public. 97 million in this CIP over the 6-year. That's not the full 10-year. This is just the 6-year. So it's a combination of making sure we have general fund, school fund, transportations continues to be the big one with 60 million, and then our sewer and stormwater. Next. The word cloud here just helps to reinforce the consistency to the comp plan with a lot of the key words that are built into the vision and the chapters popping out. Next slide. gives you the specific policies that we look to compliance with the overall comprehensive plan. And I've highlighted the chapters in particular that have been recently updated and relevant to the CIP. But of course, we look at the full comp plan, the area plans, and then the 2018 financial policies, which were adopted and updated, knowing that we had the high school CIP project, City Hall, and library in particular coming on. Those financial policies are provided in full in the CIP notebook under tab 2. Next. As we discussed on February 3rd, we have piloted an equity lens assessment, a diagnostic tool for this year's CIP. On the 3rd, we provided you the template, sort of the questions that every staff person who was submitting a project needed to answer. And those 3 questions are reflected with each project sheet within the notebook. So if you were under section 6 for facilities, you would see the project description, the costs, the timing, and then the second sheet would be the equity lens for that project. Provided in this staff report is a consolidation of all those inputs by projects, and that's attachment 9. So you could see sort of running all the facility equity assessments, then transportation, utility, sort of by page, kind of get a little better holistic view. As we looked at the good input from the staff, which did give us an opportunity to bring this to our consciousness and have it explicit instead of implicit and unintentional biases. I think that was one big gain from it. I think we also did find we didn't shift funding, timing, or geography of the projects. It affirmed that we were heading in the right direction. Still need to refine that, but we were looking at pedestrian safety, accessibility, infrastructure, reinvestments that are consistent with the vision in the comp plan for inclusion and diversity, as well as all the other equity issues built into the chapters. So while we didn't see any dramatic change, it did help affirm where we have been and where we need to keep going. So I will just note that as we go through this evening, for next steps, we definitely would welcome additional Planning Commission feedback, either this evening or as we go through the next year. As we mentioned in the fall, working with Mr. Stoddard, we're planning to come back earlier with the commissioners to talk about developing the 23 to 29 CIP, so there's more upfront input versus just in February when I'm before you with the more formal presentation. So feedback is most welcome. We do know we need to develop some policies, some assessment standards, and defined rankings to put around our equity work in the city holistically as well as with the CIP. But we didn't want the perfect to delay the good, and so we went ahead and started with this assessment tool now, and it'll give us something to react to and refine. And I think hearing from the commissioners the interest in the environmental impact lens, that certainly has many facets that should be applied to the CIP for sure. And so we can use this model and other best practices to kind of see where that may evolve over the next year as well. So as we finish out this evening and then over the course of time, definitely welcome input and reaction to how the Equity Lens pilot project worked this year for the CIP. Next. This slide is just the reminder of the biennial CIP cycle. This is an even year, so new projects were planned for in the CIP, and this is part of our way to sort of manage staff alignment to projects, is try to make sure we're finishing projects before we introduce a whole lot new ones. For this one, you can see public safety radios are new. Our current radios are getting end of life, and so they are being proposed for replacement, which is a big capital investment. This would be for police, sheriff, and the public works safety radios. Also new is starting to plan for the core infrastructure for IT. we haven't had a mechanism, a budgeting tool to actually really reinvest into firewalls and servers and the disaster recovery COOP planning between City Hall and our remote offsite that happens to be down in the Merrifield area. Can't identify the location for security, but obviously offsite, so we have redundancy if something were to happen to this facility. So this would be starting a significant planful reinvestment of those items. The project sheet gives you a description for each fiscal year, sort of where we're targeting. That item, as well as the radios, are items that do not lend themselves under GASB accounting for long-term debt. So these would be looking at probably the 5-year kind of short-term debt reinvestment issuance, because we don't have pay-go, but it's introducing a new type of debt, not always a 10 and 20 year. The next two items are ones that I've labeled as returning. So they're new in this 6-year CIP, but we've had them on the table before. Last year, the Rexham Park Advisory Board and Rexham Park staff did present the need to start planning for synthetic turf replacement. That's on a 3-year cycle, and now that we have Larry Graves, the high school, and then we'll be looking at middle school and additional synthetic turfs, they do need to be replaced for upgrade on the upper level, not the full underpinning foundation. That has created a funding challenge that we have to work through, because that upper layer replacement is not a debt eligible project. So it's kind of in this hybrid of not operating budget because of the large dollar amount, and it's not every year, but it's not a full-fledged CIP. So under GASB accounting, you can do some capital operating planning projects, and this one kind of falls into that mode where it's not a CIP, but it's what we refer to as COP, Capital Operating Program or project. And so while it's in the CIP and not funded because we haven't figured out the financial instrument or that we can afford it, we did want to get that discussion into this official document so we can continue to talk about it before it's really needed. So FY26 is the first time that our first field will be due for the turf replacement, and that'll be the high school. And then every 3 years later, we can get a staggering kind of process in place. So we will be needing as city staff to work this through over the next year to kind of get a process in place, whether it's a little bit every year or we just know this year we got to get to that 450,000 mark. The parking garage elevator, which is the Kaiser parking garage elevator that I know Mr. Stoddard has briefed the Planning Commission on, and the EDA in the staff report, I included their support letter, is back. This has been in the downtown POA as a combined project. This year it's a standalone project so that it could have more focus. You will note that it's listed as unfunded, and it is in the FY27 fiscal year. So it is in the last year, the 6th year, and it's unfunded because we have some core legal issues that need to be sorted out. So this will allow us to focus on it, the community and the property owner to know there's a commitment to work on this, but it cannot be funded till we sort out the legal issues of not being able to do public funding on private property without some form of site control, property ownership, easement, some mechanisms. There's a lot of tools out there for public-private partnerships, but staff need time. And this was removed last year to give us time to work this through, and then COVID hit. So this will put the place marker back in, but we need time to work through those legal issues. This is different than a PPA or PPTA like we're doing up at the high school with West Falls, in that those are special code sections that give us some more flexibility, but they also require a competitive process. This case, we have a specific property and a specific owner, so a procurement process is different. As you'll see in the project description, a lot of good reasons to do this project, very cost effective, good location, and so forth. We just have to work through the legal issues and then look through the financing and what can be afforded. So I just wanted to flag those as the new projects in this 6-year CIP. And we have had several projects in the 10-year planning horizon, but new this year is picking up the West End and the Gordon Road Triangle area with the new POA. So that is also in the CIP. We do have some existing projects where the cost estimates have increased due to some refinement of actual scoping, construction, needing to plan in contingency, and so forth. And so there are same projects, additional grant money, and applications put into the CIP. Next slide. The next couple slides just is a reminder of the resources that we have been putting together for the CIP for Commission and Council's knowledge and resources, as well as the community. And with the help of the planning staff, we have been able to update the report cards for where we are achieving comprehensive plan and POA adopted policies and actions. Also, with Caitlin's help, sort of tracking how funding changes between when you adopt and see a CIP and when we're actually implementing. And we are, especially in the transportation area, and you have this as an attachment in your staff report, maintaining a delivery schedule for the transportation projects because there's so many of them. And it really has to be coordinated with the staff resources. So I've just taken an excerpt of that on this slide here with the full report in your attachment. That kind of gives you a sense of where we are with the number of projects by fiscal year, where they are in different stages, whether we're applying for the grant, it's in design, engineering, or actually in construction. And we're using that to make sure we're staggering better the fiscal years. You can see we're still pretty heavy in FY22 and 23, and those are the backlog projects that I had mentioned earlier. And then over time, we should be in that 14, 15 kind of mode so that we can do a project right and complete it, move to the next with that staggering instead of trying to do too many at one time and not doing them all well or efficiently. We also are flagging the procurement piece because we get a lot of federal money, which is great. But it comes with a lot more requirements, especially around the procurement, the documentation and tracking. And so with that, we're trying to balance out how many federal procurements we can do a year because of that escalated staff impact and then the regular. So that just gives you a sense of how we're working to stagger that. Next slide. We are continuing to have the CIP map resources available on the website, the overall interactive project map, as well as one targeted for neighborhood traffic calming. Next. So for the next 3 slides, I want to kind of highlight the key issues that are embedded within the CIP, and then where some of the answers are to the questions that came up during our last meeting together. So of course, I have mentioned the new projects, so you can see the actual dollar amounts here, just so it's a consolidated reference for you. Ongoing, we will continue to have streetlights and sidewalks. We did talk about at the your last meeting when we had the standalone report on the streetlights, where we are in implementing the streetlights, which is using FY21 current money, which is 186,000. And then going forward, we may need some of that to finish out the streetlights, but the predominant focus will be on standing up a residential community sidewalk program so we can start addressing where we have accessibility and walkability issues. This is PAYGO. We've maintained the commitment with the city manager's support to keep PAYGO cash money in this project, which makes it much more flexible for this type of project, and it's at 150,000 a year. So for FY21, it was 186,000 because we had at the last minute a little bit of give, but going forward, we'll have a straight 150,000. Parallel and complementing that, neighborhood traffic calming, we're keeping it at 100,000 per year, and so that we can continue to impact in both of these areas our residential communities and not get a backlog, for example, in NTC type projects again. Pavement and traffic signals is where you'll see not necessarily new projects, but ones where we needed to apply for more grant funding in order to fully deliver on the traffic signals pieces or road reconstruction, but with the traffic signals, that pedestrian accessibility, the crosswalks, the narrowing of the roads, the stormwater, the whole package. And speaking of stormwater, we do have ongoing projects in the stormwater area, as you've been hearing and tracking through the Stormwater Task Force, just under 7 million in this 6-year CIP for flooding mitigation. That is being done with no rate increase for FY22. And we'll have a little bit more information on that as a later slide. And continuing the commitment to sanitary sewer. Utilities are vital infrastructure, and so we will continue to reinvest in those areas. Once again, no rate increase for FY22. Next. For school facilities, we do have funding in there for TJ Elementary School for the expansion and renovation of the original section. And you'll see that in 26 and 27. But for the regular reinvestment where they need to do a roof or a carpet, there's insufficient PAYGO, and those type of activities need to be cash funded, not debt financed. And with the constraints on the school complicated by COVID, they haven't been able to transfer some cash to this function as we had done with the general government facilities. So we have maintained that in the CIP, so we document the need. The way we were able to handle it with FY20 funds at the end of that year, there was the revenue surplus prior to COVID, and we were able to use our virtual revenue share to split that 50-50. That resulted in 390,000 that the school was able to use for capital needs. And you'll see their first year FY22 funding request is actually reduced to reflect being able to take care of some of those documented needs. In the 10-year long view, I mentioned we had the new West End Gordon Road Triangle POA. That's proposed at 30 million. Looking at the POA and the plan and what's scoped in there, that's a real preliminary estimate. We also continued North Washington and West Broad. Those are out years. We will need to continue scoping them, looking at the legal framework, looking at financing options, grants, but it now is in the CIP for planning, and we can move forward. Did want to highlight again the COVID impact on the Commonwealth Transportation 6-year improvement plan, the SIP. This is where our transportation grant funding gets approved at the state level to flow back to us. They had significant revenue shortfalls. They delayed approving the last 6-year plan, and it did get approved in December, but in order to handle the revenue shortfalls, they did have to delay quite a few projects. They were all supposed to be non-active projects, so nothing would get stopped. In the rush of having to do it really quickly and react, the city actually did have 4 projects that would have been delayed the way they did their cash flow projections for us. We wouldn't have had enough money to actually award a contract, and that would violate our procurement contracting policy. One was South Oak Street Bridge, which is really important because it is a structurally deficient bridge and impacts safety walkability around 2 big neighborhood traffic calming programs and an elementary school, and then 3 intersection projects. So with a lot of staff work, which I greatly appreciate, in coordination with the central office of VDOT, we were able to resolve, and they moved money around and or going to help us administer projects so that these are back on track. Rarely do I sort of have good news on WMATA, so I do want to highlight, just knocked something off my desk, sorry for the background noise. Highlight that there's no subsidy increase from WMATA that would impact negatively on the CIP. That is good financially. It does mean we're still living through service reductions as a result of COVID and the loss of ridership and therefore ridership revenue. We are continuing to use our NVTA 30% local debt for what we still are committed to pay for. And the reason for no local subsidy increase is WMATA has received federal and state relief due to the pandemic. They are covered through December 31, 2021. And after that, we are hoping that the current federal legislation that's under consideration will come together to assist transit providers as well as other at-risk needs due to the pandemic, so that further service cuts do not need to be undertaken. We need to be able to restore confidence in our transit, get them operation and financially sustainable, but it's going to take time. And we know for the congestion in this area and our economic development, transit, as you all were talking with multiple modes, is core to our recovery. But we also locally can't afford a big bill to fill that gap. So right now we're stable, but we will need to continue monitoring financial resources, hopefully from the federal level. Next slide. So before I get into just some highlights of the other project sections so that you have the reference source, and then we'll do a financial and open up to questions, I do want to highlight that within the staff reports, we have followed up with questions and comments from the January 27th report that Mr. Stoddard provided. That's at line 170 of the staff report from this evening, as well as the items that came up during the February 3rd discussion. And so I've highlighted what the topics were here. Some of them I've touched on with my earlier comments. They're things that we responded to in the staff report, and be glad to do any follow-up discussion. For this evening in your motion, which is in the staff report, I did rewrite item number 2, which was the one that Mr. Stevens questioned if it was still relevant. And it was one that had been there for a while, so I tried to capture what was the original intent and hopefully freshen it up so it was more clear. And then I did add 3 items that wasn't in the draft you saw on February 3rd that tied to equity lens, environmental impact, and the operating cost calculator to reflect your support and direction to continue working those items. So when we get to that point, I'll welcome feedback if we captured that correctly. And I did, of course, leave a line for anything else that you all would like to add, because that has been a helpful guidepost as we work with developing the adopted CIP and then the next 6-year window. Next slide, Emily. Go ahead and go to the next one. Yeah, so this section will be the utilities, just to keep what we don't see, but we totally rely on very much in front of us. So this is a map we created last year to kind of highlight where we are in the sewer rehab lining. 44% done, but do have a lot of miles to go. Very important to reinvest. Next. And we need to reinvest because of the age of these pipes. We are getting I&I flows, which is a problem. It impacts capacity, and we are working with our treatment plants that we ship to make sure they're upgraded in compliance with federal regulations. In the CIP that's before you, over the course of the year, staff have done a lot of good work with a capacity study and a rate study, and we were actually able to offset some capacity purchases. So you'll see 6 million down below. That's a reduction from last year, a significant one. The treatment plan improvements have remained pretty constant. We have an annual commitment to those. Part of the way we were able to rework some of the capacity is looking at what we have with the development fees, as well as what we were investing in our sanitary sewer rehab, those miles of lines that we need to work. We are still committing to sanitary sewer rehab. You'll see 1.5 million starting in the out years of the CIP, because currently we do have 2 million that hasn't been able to be deployed, and we'll use that for the next couple of years, not deployed because of COVID and other work priorities. So we will not step down on the work for the rehab, but restructuring that has allowed us to offset some of the capacity purchases and debt issuance, which is really important. I'll note for the sanitary sewer, as I mentioned earlier, no rate increase for FY22. The rate study is still underway. Next. Stormwater. This is a map that we had in the CIP presentation last year. A lot of good progress on projects, and more to come, as you know, with the big 6 large projects that are in the CIP, part of which has already been partially funded through council. Next slide will give us a little bit of some specifics. We are continuing to repair and reinvest in the 60-year-old infrastructure, complying with the federal mandates, and of course, as we've been experiencing locally, dealing with that flooding, we need to mitigate those quantity issues. The task force that was chartered by council was very successful in recommending and prioritizing the first big projects that are dealing with quantity, and those are in the CIP. They were approved for the first part in FY22 and now continuing in the CIP. Their task force charter was extended, which is allowing them to continue to work with staff in the community around quality and the watershed management plans, the other projects that were in that 10-year planning document that were not the 6 top priority or may have been more quality oriented. Currently, staff is finalizing the rate study in conjunction with the task force. And at this point, there's no increase for the rate proposed for FY22. We're able to handle it with what council has already awarded and funding that we had in the stormwater. I will note in your staff report, I did include the Public Works memo on different grants and funding sources, just so it's consolidated with the CIP. It is the same memo and related to the PowerPoint that Mr. Stoddard has provided to the commission as well. Projects specifically, the 7 million for the flooding mitigation, those 6 projects that we've been referring to would be debt financed over the course of those projects, it does increase about $160 per year per homeowner as an estimate for that cost. For FY22, as I indicated, we're not increasing the rate, but as we finish the study and look at capacity and user fees, we'll reassess that. We do have a 4-mile run future grant. This has been in the CIP previously. It is in the 10-year out window. When the Planning Commission saw it last year, it was at 10 million. It is increased to 15 million with a little bit more knowledge. It's still a rough estimate, but it's a little more refined range. And that grant would be consistent with the watershed management plan, but also the adopted North Washington POA. And Emily, next slide. So in your CIP notebook in tab 3, page 6, you'll see the summary that's before you on the screen, and tab 10 gives you the details on the project. So this CIP is committing 41 million to utilities, sewer, and stormwater. Next, we'll highlight a little bit of the general fund, and if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide for me. This is the summary page that you'll find in tab 3 that highlights all of the public safety, IT, facilities, and recs and parks, some of which I highlighted, some of which, like fellows and park master planning, I didn't specifically highlight, but they are continuation of projects, reinvesting in our park master planning. And for fellows, the 400,000 would be for the actual implementation of what's recommended from the outcome of the community master plan and the design work. You'll note it's pushed out by 1 year. It was in FY22 when you saw it last year, and that's just the reality of COVID having delayed the whole process to date. Next, we'll give you a little bit more highlight on those recs and park items. So Emily, you can go ahead and go to slide 23. The CIP that's presented for you for recs and park does have the advisory board's concurrence. You'll see here where we are on fellows. The FY21 money has been appropriated, so once the community engagement is done to develop the master plan, then Public Works and Recs and Park can move into design. Continuing to look at the reinvestment into the master plans, you'll see that the FY24 CIP for park master plans includes the 150,000 voluntary concession. And this gives me an opportunity to acknowledge in the staff report, you do have the community benefits summary chart that talks about all the voluntary concessions that have come in through the projects, but also added to that chart now is where did the money go? And that was certainly one of the questions from the commissioners. It's how are voluntary concessions used for CIP? This is one example. We certainly have had it with neighborhood traffic calming and school construction, Mount Daniel and Mary Ellen Henderson, predominantly to date, and of course now the high school. Synthetic turf is the one I mentioned earlier, and then they do put on the table the open space to continue the focus on the need to acquire additional open space consistent to the open space adopted plan and the charter that was assigned to the advisory board to keep working on open space. It is listed. You'll notice it's not funded because we cannot issue debt when there's not property identified. So it keeps it flagged for us to look at, but similar to fellows, an opportunity came up and then we sought council appropriation to issue the debt. Next slide. And you can go ahead and roll to the next one. This is a standard picture that I have shared to kind of give you you in the community a sense of the variety of our facilities. It's not anywhere near all of them, but I was excited to kind of add the note that City Hall is now, as we've shared, LEED Silver certified, and of course we know the library is under construction. Next slide. Some highlights for general government facilities. We are continuing the facility reinvestment, and as I noted, using local cash that we transferred from the operating budget to stay in the capital. The type of projects we need to do for reinvesting in our facilities, from HVAC to roof, don't lend themselves to debt financing. So cash is a much more flexible tool for us, and we are committing $1.75 million over the next 6 years towards that. The CIP also includes a public facility security system. In your notebook, it's actually under the public safety section. For the presentation, I aligned it with facilities. This is so we can have the door access and camera monitoring system that we have at City Hall and is being designed into the library in all of our facilities. In working with the police chief, we did delay this to FY25 due to COVID and other workload and focused items, and needing to finish out the library. So our core facilities will have the security, and then we'll start phasing in the additional ones. Fire Station 6. We are continuing the $150,000 per year, starting again in FY24. As the commission will remember, for FY21, we approved $550,000 for the bay doors. So we sort of upfront put all the $150,000 into 1 year, with the understanding that for the next 2 years, which would be 22 and 23, we will not fund additional money for the fire station, allow those projects to work. Regrettably, because of COVID, the money was appropriated, but we haven't actually issued the debt. We've been working closely with Arlington so that they're aware of that. And as soon as finance and council feels we're at a financially sustainable place to proceed, which we hope will be the beginning of FY22, where this upcoming July we'll be able to issue the debt. And I will note we actually had a very productive annual capital meeting with Arlington today to talk about where they are on current projects and their future need. And the CIP project sheet that's in your notebook, in working with Arlington, they've identified the type of things that they need to do over time. We are in a good place because the HVAC is finally fully done in the building. The windows are finally done in the building. The heaters that were problematic over the bay doors, causing everything to warp, have been relocated. The bay doors, replacing those 10 doors to the bifold, will be the next big project. And then we've sort of caught back up on some major issues, and then over time, it'll start being the kitchens, bathroom, ADA, roof, and so forth. And with that, Emily, next slide. And we'll touch base a little bit on the schools. So that is before everybody, and I love this one because of all our logos. Next slide. So this is adopted by the school board and transmitted for me to submit. What I put into the CIP is as the school board transmitted it. Besides the traditional project sheet that we use for all of our CIP projects, you'll see in the notebook the school board's full document that was on their board packet. And so you'll get a broader description of the projects. They're also providing the traditional information about enrollment and projections that often the commission has asked about. As I noted, the facility reinvestment right now is unfunded. A lot of those tasks you'll see there are flooring, security, roof, water intrusion at the preschool, the high school stadium restrooms to be redone. That's not the whole stadium concession restroom isn't part of the high school project. A lot of those, as I mentioned, are not debt eligible, so we need to assess how we would fund those. And then the TJ project that I mentioned earlier is highlighted there with a little bit more detail. Next. Transportation, the big part of the CIP. And moving to the next slide, we've retained the the spigots, the graphic to kind of just reinforce for the community how we leverage dollars with our local money and our 30% NVTA. And next slide. This gives you the summary of the projects by funding source. So you can see that we have 45 million in grants and debt and pay-go. And in an out year, we have a to be determined for the parking garage that I mentioned earlier. So you can really tell with the gold grant level how much we're leveraging our local dollars. This CIP has a lot of projects and infrastructure that are continuing for what you've seen before. So we got the bridges, we got the pavements, the traffic signals, really focusing on our area plans, POAs for downtown, North Washington, West Broad, South Washington, and the new one, West End Gordon Road Triangle. And as I mentioned earlier, continuing on NTC and sidewalks and streetlights, and you can see the 11.8 million there for WMATA, a significant financial and legal commitment from the city, but fortunately this year, not a major increase. Next slide. And this is just another way of looking at it to give you the 10-year look ahead view, which is most predominantly visible in the transportation section because that's where a lot of the POA work is. So you'll see where we are at the 6-year total of about little under 60 million, but yet when we do the long range planning, we over double it to 143 million. So that is a significant commitment to executing the comp plan and the POA small area plans. And yes, it's going to take grants, and yes, it's going to take staff resources, but it gives us a good planning resource. For the website to the planning library, I've provided it here. I know you all know where it is, but that way the community can find those planning documents. So if you could go ahead to slide 34, let me touch base on the financial piece so that we can move into more of a dialogue than my discussion of just presenting. So this is the general fund part of the CIP, the pie chart for everything but utilities. And so you can see, of course, transportation continues to be the largest part of this CIP, but everything is being touched on. The next slide is general fund and the utilities. So transportation is still the largest, but it drops from 80% to 62%. And the utilities are a big commitment when you look at sanitary sewer of 15 and storm for 7%. So those two make up the largest part of this, but once again, still focusing on facilities and public safety. Of course, when the high school CIP project was within the 6-year, that chart changed a little and the schools were on the larger slice of the pie. Next slide is one of the views for ensuring that we are complying with the financial policy, part of the commissioner's charter to look at as we review the CIP. This is the available fund balance. And as you can see by the red line, which is the 20% of expenditure policy line, we are well above that in terms of ensuring appropriate fund balance. That is really important for covering the high school debt and as well as the other debt that you'll see in a next slide in terms of library, city hall, fire station, Rexham Park, all the slightly smaller debt issuances than the high school. It is higher than the red line, and that was always intentional so that we could handle fluctuations in the delivery of West Falls and the economic development to cover the debt. It's become even more prudent and necessary with COVID as we work through these issues. So we are in a very good position financially, but one we have to continue to monitor as we work through the pandemic. Next slide. This shows the debt service as a percentage of expenditure. That's the other bellwether for the financial policies. And once again, we are within policy. The upper purple line is the 15% maximum of debt service that we can issue against the operating expenditures budget. And then the blue line is the 12% policy goal. So you always want to be above or below the 12% in debt issuance, but the sweet spot can be between that 12% and 15% to be within policy. And as you can see right now, we are between those because of the high school and the other debts. The red is the new and the blue is the existing. As we pay off the new and the existing, then we get back down below the 12%. And that is when, starting in 25-26, you then build capacity to do more debt issuance. And so those projects that are showing unfunded right now then can move into the stronger funding discussion. Next slide. This is in your notebook under tab 1. It just takes the two graphs that I showed you and give you numbers if you prefer to see the numbers versus a graph. So it's just an alternative view. And the next slide brings us back to why we're doing this. It is the comprehensive plan. It is reinvesting in our community, using the budget to deliver on the community's vision and policies. And so this is just to remind us of what the vision is and the core values that we look to implement. And the next slide is just a highlight of the schedule. We, of course, are tonight on the 17th. We'll be looking for the city manager's budget on March 8th. Full adoption on the 26th in May. I plan to come back with either a memo and or in-person report as to what was the outcome. I'm hoping not major changes, but in COVID and financial times, there may have to be changes. We'll monitor that as we go through the council process. And then, as we've discussed, plan to work with Mr. Stoddard and the chair to have an opportunity in the fall to have a more upfront dialogue on CIP development. The next slide is for the community so they know where the documents are posted on the website. All your staff reports and attachments and the presentation, the full CIP document is on the CIP webpage, as well as, of course, in the Planning Commission resource, and how to find me. And so with that, Chair, thank you for your patience for allowing me to work through that presentation. And I look forward to questions, comments, and your direction. And the staff report does have the proposed motion.
All right. Thank you very much. Putting your cell phone number in the presentation, that's brave. I will kick off questions or comments. I see Mr. Stevens is ready to go. Take it away.
Okay, well, as always, there's a lot of work evident in the CIP planning process. I had about 4 or 5 questions, which I think you could just answer quickly in the interest of time. First one is that on the staff memo, it mentions that there are 4 new project sheets that have been added by staff. Are those identified anywhere? I suspect they were in your presentation. I just couldn't reference it to that line 108 statement.
Sure. They are on slide. I'll give you the slide number, but it's the radios, the IT, the Kaiser parking garage, and the synthetic turf.
Okay, so will we get your presentation?
Yes.
Okay, good. That'll help.
I'm sure Emily will help me with that. And we'll also put it up on the website.
Good. Second one is, I meant to ask this in past years, but I'm going to finally get around to it this year. On line 114, it talks about CIP versus maintenance projects. Are the maintenance projects still in the CIP? I couldn't tell from line 114 through 117 whether it was maintenance projects are somehow dealt with.
Yeah, there are not maintenance projects in the CIP. The definitions provided here to help the staff when they're developing the CIP to separate out the two. Maintenance projects need to be in the operating budget. The one thing that we're working on to try to sort out is the one that's kind of in between. And that's, you know, operating might be a traffic signal repair and a replacement of a controller cabinet or a significant part, but not a whole redo. If we're redoing the whole traffic signal intersection, all that's going to be in the CIP. The one hybrid that we're trying to work through is like the synthetic turf, where we're literally replacing the upper level, the grass and the pellets, but we're not redoing the foundation. That one by Gatsby governmental accounting comes across as maintenance, but it's not, it's a capital maintenance. And so it can be in the CIP, but you can't do debt financing. So there are a few hybrids, but in general, maintenance is in the operating budget and capital will be in the document before you.
Okay, that's great. Maybe to address slower people like myself, maybe next year, for next year's staff memo, you can just put in there that, oh yeah, by the way, maintenance projects therefore are not in the CIP, just to bring that to a conclusion.
Great, thank you.
Next question has to do with IT upgrades. I recall back in the misty past when we actually met physically that we, in the building, that we had a problem with the Wi-Fi not being accessible to the public. Is that capability included within that project?
It is not, because it's actually in place. You all just don't know it because you don't get to be here, but we do have public Wi-Fi in City Hall, and we will have it in the library, and we have it in the community center and Gage House. And it's separated, so there's an independent, secure public one that you all could walk in and just log into. There's also Wi-Fi for staff, so we can access our documents securely. And then there's a third leg, which is if we have contractors or vendors who are sort of in between. So it is in place.
Great, I'm sure our chairman will be very happy about that. Regarding the North Washington Street multimodal improvements for $14.5 million, is there a description of that anywhere? That's the program 72000.
Yeah, let me look that up. I don't know, Caitlin, if you know quickly the page number.
Well, I'm sorry, what project was it?
It's 72000. I don't need it now, but I'm just curious if someplace I can just go look and just see what's in that project.
The North Washington POA.
Multimodal improvement.
Oh.
Multimodal. It is.
That's still in early planning and development. It's a planning opportunity area that we've sort of estimated the cost of the total program. So there were projects broken out at one point. I can try and find those for you, Mr. Stevens, and send those.
Yeah, absolutely no rush. I was just curious what was in there. So got some names.
Follow up.
The last one I had. I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, Mr. Paul may know it as well, what was in that. I know there was one, the intersection of North Washington and, oh, now I forget it. Right there where near 400 North Washington. Cindy, do you remember?
Yeah,
that's Columbia. We have the intersection project underway. For the multimodal, if you are interested in that one, Mr. Stevens, is page 8-13, which has some of the projects broken out for the future ones. And I'm looking for the page number for North Washington.
I'm happy to chime in with
Paul.
With a brief description. So there was previously a staff prepared and council endorsed an application to the Northern Virginia Transportation Authority, NVTA, for a suite of investments in the, as Caitlin said, the North Washington Street planning opportunity area, which runs along North Washington Street from the city-county line to I think Great Falls. And so what was included in the application was upgrading the signal at Gresham to be a full signal instead of the emergency signal. The multimodal benefit of that is that it would allow for the construction of pedestrian crosswalks, which are currently unmarked at that location. It also included upgraded crossings at Jefferson Street. Previously, that was considered for a signal as part of the Northgate project, but I think ultimately it was decided not to install it. But there is a pedestrian desire line there. You can see people trying to cross that intersection. And then general pedestrian improvements throughout the area, widening the sidewalk, installing street trees and furniture, and bringing the corridor up to the city streetscape standards.
Yeah, that's all great. I guess that's pretty far out in the future and there's no money for it. So it's a lot to happen there to make that tangible, but it intrigued me. So the last one I had to do with the school funding, and it's just clarification on my part. So you touched on these, I think, for example, page 6-3, it had the 1.675 million. It's needed for Mary Ellen Henderson for the flooring, for Jesse Thackeray, the waterproofing, for the MEH for the roof replacement, and you mentioned the stadium restroom renovation. And it says that that's unfunded. And then a little further out, there's the TJ, the $3.5 million for new windows and restroom renovation, kitchens, et cetera, and that is shown with debt funding. But with the voluntary concession money that's been redirected as part of the Broad Washington, would that have been available for those kind of school projects? And that without it now, we'll have to figure out some way to come up with the funding for those needs?
Really good question. A couple components. Before I do that, I'll just note that thank you, Paul, for describing the projects. The POA documents actually describe in a lot more detail, but multimodal is page 8-13 and North Washington is 8-17 for a little bit more details. So on the school funding, we got a couple pieces there. A lot of the facility reinvestment items are marginally capital. They're a little bit like the water intrusion at TJ, and carpet and flooring are not normally capital unless they are part of a larger project. So you can do a city hall or library, and obviously you're going to renovate and expand a new plumbing, HVAC, etc., but you're going to do the finishes, you're going to do the carpets, the wall, and the paint. So those things can be ancillary to a capital project. In the case of some of the school needs for the existing reinvestment, they are getting closer to maintenance than they are capital. And so that's where you definitely can't do debt, and you would need to have cash, or it's not eligible. If council was to do the revenue sharing again, those things are one-time money, and they could use it as we did in FY20 with the 390. For the voluntary concessions, those are for the school capitals, to your question and example, those are tied to the project as a result of enrollment growth. So, or projected enrollment, mitigating the impact of that development. And Paul can probably describe the nexus of voluntary concessions much better than I. So funding from voluntary concessions cannot be used for roof and carpet and those smaller things. They can be used for school capital projects like TJ. And we have used them for Mary Ellen Henderson and Mount Daniel because those were all enrollment. TJ, one of the predominant pieces of that project is for enrollment growth projected in the out years, not in the near term. There are ancillary things like ADA accessibility and replacing the 2012 original windows and kitchen. They are adding a security front door, and so that's a significant capital, sort of new lobby, secure entrance. So that has the nexus to a voluntary concession. So redoing Broad in Washington to some other use is the discussion, obviously, that's before council and the community. I will note, though, that there is still voluntary concessions money out there for Founders Row, for example, that's dedicated to schools that hasn't been allocated. So that could be used for TJ. So right now it is in the CIP proposed for debt. But as we get closer to the project, then the financing plan could be blended with debt and or voluntary concessions. So hopefully I covered the intent of your question, your components, and I'm glad to expand on something further if I missed it.
I think it helps. It's just an area where I think, people will benefit by kind of knowing what the effect is of the various decisions.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty much it for my questions. When we get to it, I was going to make one recommended add to the that point.
All right, thanks, Tim. Anyone else have some comments or questions about the CIP? I have a couple of things if people are still thinking. All right, I'll just go with my stuff real quick. And then other people are gonna have a shot. Yeah, the POA, those large, big ticket, millions of dollars out years thing was a little bit confusing to me because I think what I'm realizing is I think those are on there so that hopefully we'll get a grant, sort of like we did up at the intersection by the new high school, because we historically haven't funded those kinds of large scale improvements to opportunity areas. But I like that. I like putting them in there to keep us thinking about it. Because certainly a crossing at Gresham, that's probably where I'm going to die. Crossing over to get to Crossman Park right there. It's confusing as heck. But so save my life, put a crossing in there. That'd be worth millions of dollars to me anyway. A couple other thoughts. The turf, that is a tricky one with the cost of maintaining those turf fields. Do you guys do any analysis comparing, like, if those were grass fields, how much freaking money we'd spend trying to keep the grass growing and attribute that to the maintenance of the turf? Because it seems like, I'm sure the turf fields aren't completely maintenance free, but it's got to be cheaper than watering and cutting and all the crap you have to do with real grass. Yeah, I know that Danny has done that, and certainly the utilization and the 7x24, we certainly have increased the benefit. So there is a benefit for it. It doesn't quite get to that big third-year jump to 450,000 because you're amortizing it over a much longer life cycle.
Cindy, this is Amy.
It's Amy, thank you. I didn't see you on the call.
I don't have the exact numbers, but we have done the math, and it's pretty comparative. And obviously with the synthetic turf, you're getting nearly double the usage, especially if you've got lights on the field. But it's pretty close in cost.
Yeah, the dramatic extra usage of a turf field over a grass field is certainly something to keep in mind. I probably should have looked more carefully, but traffic signal at South Washington and South Maple, that's one I would prioritize because I feel like, maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like that mini Target and all the limited but hopefully successful retail there on South Washington would get a lot more foot traffic from the neighborhoods in Fairfax County if you didn't have to take your life into your hands getting across that street. So I don't know where that stands. I know traffic intersections are expensive, and that one's shared with Fairfax County, which I'm sure complicates it, but that one seems high priority to me.
Yeah, it is indeed, and we concur with you. And Zach's raised his hand, and I was going to ask him or Ali to update us. That is an active project, so Zach, if you could take it first. And we've also put in a Smart Scale grant application, which will be a couple years out, but it would take basically from that intersection to the city line, trying to improve the pedestrian multimodal safety components as well. But Zach, for the specific South Washington, South Maple intersection.
Yes, good evening. So that intersection has actually achieved 100% design, and we're expecting authorization to go out to bid from VDOT in the next 4 to 6 weeks. So about 30 to, I think it's 45 days. We're expecting that authorization to come through, and we'll be actively seeking proposals from contractors on that. So I would imagine if all goes well, we could be under construction on that intersection sometime during this calendar. I'll add that Ali is on the call tonight if he wants to add anything to that, but that's kind of the high level overview.
Yeah, that's great. That's great to hear. I think that would be a huge improvement. And then my last thing, not a big deal, and I probably won't, I'm not going to harp on it because it's at the end of the CIP and there's no funding for it, but the elevator for the Kaiser garage, you know, I saw the explanation and I think it's good information to have, but it's a little unfair to say that the $650,000 investment gets us these parking spaces. We already have the parking spaces. It just makes it a little bit easier to access. So, but I think the real question is, well, one question is, in my experience, elevators are expensive to maintain based on the elevator in the office building that I'm in right now that I had to walk up the stairs today because it wasn't working again. But I know that we're implementing a new tool, right, to kind of analyze the ongoing costs of things like that. So I don't know if that's been applied to the elevator idea, but certainly before that thing gets funded in future years, I would say apply that to see what the real cost of the elevator is. And then I noticed there's a comment about making more accessible spaces, which I do think is important. Obviously, if you have mobility problems, you're not going to currently park up there and then walk down the stairs. But if there is a shortage there, I would encourage, you know, put more handicap spots on the on-street parking or something like that to make more accessible spots available. But, you know, I just don't know if we've done any analysis. I mean, you still got to, you know, riding the elevator is easier than going up and down stairs, but is it really going to actually make people park there? It's still a hassle to catch an elevator. And then obviously, I don't know what the, you know, I don't know what the current agreement is with Kaiser, but, and maybe building, you know, sinking 650 grand in an elevator gives us some leeway to ink a more long-term firm agreement, but it'd be obviously terrible to spend that money and then have Kaiser decide a couple years later, like, no, we're not going to like share the spaces anymore. Thanks for the elevator. So, but it's out there, it's unfunded. It seems like it's an idea. So I'll let future planning commissioners figure out if that makes sense. But I would be wary. But those are all my specific thoughts, and I see Mr. Pointes has his hand up, so I'll let him take a crack at it now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just be fast. I don't have any specific comments on the projects. It's all very comprehensive. Thank you, Cindy, to you and your team. It's really well thought out. But since you asked just about the equity lens, again, I know we've covered this before, but to really compliment the team for employing that this time. It's I know it was you know, something that was kind of been experimented with this year, and that it didn't, as you said, didn't really change a lot of the investments, the decisions that were in there. But I think you should just be applauded for at least starting that process and committed to refining it, you know, over the next couple of years. I think the point on doing that early in the process is really critical. Right, just the way it was done this time for lots of different reasons, I know, but just looking at it as a way to evaluate stuff that was already in there is helpful. But it'd be really helpful to see if you know, what gets knocked out or what you know, how does it really change the investments that we're making. Again, lots of value in at least having the discussion, but we'd love to see it change or have some kind of impact on the investments that we make. And I think that comes down to some kind of accountability metric. I don't really know. I was trying to think how to describe this, but some kind of baseline measurement for what we're trying to achieve, and then the right kind of metrics so that we can hold ourselves accountable to make sure that we're not just evaluating the projects based on, you know, the high, medium, low criteria that you have, which I think is good for the start, but you know, something where we're really making sure that it is something that permeates, you know, all these really important investments. But again, I just really want to applaud you and the team for you know, for having the courage to take a shot at that and for committing to refine that in the long term. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, actually, that's a good comment. I was talking to someone about the equity lens. I was telling them how we were doing it and the CIP, And I was talking about like a similar thing for my business. And one of the things you realize if you think about it is if it's effective, right, and if people know we're going to apply this equity lens, what you might end up seeing is the equity lens never changes anything because the change is baked into the original request. So but which is not a reason to not do it. I mean, that's a reason to do it. But it'll be interesting to see over time how we analyze it, what we actually, because to me, hey, the equity lens never changes the proposals. Well, maybe it changed the proposal before it was proposed. So, which I think would be the ultimate goal. But that's an interesting thought, exercise. All right. Any other commissioners have comments or thoughts? Ms. Kumar?
Hi, sorry, I just have a few things I wanted to mention. I'm also a very big fan of the equity lens and applaud you all for taking the time to think about those projects in that way. I think it's really important for the city to be doing that. I'm also a big fan of the maintenance cost calculator, and I was wondering, would the sort of cost of maintenance of the turf have been revealed, if we'd had that in place when those fields were put in? If we'd had that cost calculator in place. I'm a big fan of the turf fields, by the way. My kids use them all the time. I'm so grateful we don't have muddy mess that we have at TJ. So it's terrific. I think it's well worth it. But we do need to plan for those baked in costs.
Yeah, I think it would have put it in the forefront and we would have budgeted for it. I would say when the projects were developed, as Amy mentioned, they did that analysis sort of comparing grass to turf. So we sort of had the data, but it didn't get put into the budget process. Similarly, when we are doing bus shelters, got the grants, we put them in. It's an equity issue because we have people that can use buses without standing in the rain, for example, but we didn't put into, well, if a panel gets broken or they need to be cleaned twice a year. Now Public Works crews are doing that instead of, and we didn't calculate that in. So I really appreciate the staff's work, and Caitlin's been taking the lead on this and getting input from our PMs, trash cans, streetscape standards, what's the cost to maintain them? So we're not back at a big capital project because we got to redo it. So we need to refine it for sure, but I think we're heading in the right direction. And then the next step in challenges, that's got to be built into the operating budget because it won't be in the CIP. So we need to connect them. A little challenging right now, and has been recently because of the financial situations, but we'll get there.
Great. Well, thank you. Really important data to be gathering and questions to be asking. I noticed in the transportation section that there were 3 collector streets that are on the books for reconstruction in the next few years: Lincoln Avenue in fiscal year 23, Park Avenue in fiscal year 24, and Great Falls in 26. And I'm just I would really love it if we could be thinking ahead about some sort of installation of bike facilities on those streets, whether or not that's appropriate and possible, and how we would fund that, because those are paths that I often use as a cyclist, and they don't feel particularly safe. I think Park is probably the best of the 3, but I think as we're rebuilding, I think we had a missed opportunity with Southwest. Actually, we completely rebuilt that road from the bottom up and put it back the way it was because that's sort of what the residents on the street wanted. And I think maybe we should have been thinking about, like, what's the need? I think there are a lot of people commuting in from Fairfax and a lot of city residents that use that road to commute to the trail. And I think we probably could have put a little more thought into developing some real bicycle facilities there. So just a thought on that. On the elevator, what's the benefit of adding, if it was delayed from last year to this year, what's the benefit of adding it now?
I will defer to Mr. Stoddard to expand upon it, but the CPED staff were recommending it be in because it would show that there's something that we could dialogue with Kaiser about versus it not being in any planning document. Mr. Stoddard, did I capture that?
Yeah, I think there's always a benefit to putting to including in the CIP, whether it's an out-year project or an unfunded project, sort of the public's intent, whether that's to build something or to partner on something. We've had success with that in the grant world. I know when I first joined the city, I found we were getting a pretty high failure rate on our grant applications, and we were losing a lot of points just because we didn't have projects included in our CIP. So that was the first lift, was getting unfunded projects that we intend to go after grants for, and including them in the CIP. And that included quite a conversation on the local side to say it's okay to include an unfunded project in your CIP. Here, this is a little different, right? This is about sort of seeding the idea of seeding is in planting, the idea of a public-private partnership. Whether that was, what was done up at the West End, where the city and NBTA came in as a financial partner for the streetscape along Broad and Haycock, what's shown in the West End for sort of a street and utility grid to support redevelopment. North Washington Street redeveloping 4 Mile Run. So here in downtown, right, it's sort of calling out what are the key projects within the planning opportunity areas that would sort of serve a public purpose, and also unlock sort of some of the trip hazards that people have for redevelopment. So downtown small area plan calls for small scale infill development. Especially within that 100 and 200 block, there are some missing pieces within the street wall where you've got sites that are underdeveloped. They've got surface parking lots on them. Those sites can be difficult to park when someone comes in with a development application. So if you had some sort of shared parking facility, people could buy in, they could use that as part of their TDM plan. Not only does it support the restaurants that are already in the area, but long-term, that could lay the groundwork for some sort of shared parking agreement or public parking authority, whereby the landowners and the business owners would be entering into parking agreements across the district. And so part of that is just building the supply of parking so that you could stand up an authority like that. It's been a model that's been used in other communities. Winchester, Virginia has centralized parking garages around their pedestrian mall. Silver Spring has a parking authority that manages parking lots throughout their downtown area. So it's a way of consolidating your parking. And although it seems odd, I think parking can be a pedestrian strategy. The idea of park once and walk, so that you don't have people driving from shop to shop to shop. If they go to 2 or 3 different places, you can park once, at the Kaiser, and you could actually spend the whole afternoon in downtown Falls Church.
I agree. Thank you, Paul, for that explanation. And people do definitely have to drive from shop to shop because of the towing practices that we have. If you shop at Doodle Hopper and you go to CVS, you got to repark your car. So anyway, it makes sense. I like the idea of getting better use out of the Kaiser garage, assuming they're amenable to that, and certainly making it more accessible is something that we should do. It feels like a little bit of a chicken and egg thing because there's still a lot of unanswered questions about the partnership with Kaiser. But I guess putting it in the CIP does not obligate us to do it, right? It just says that it's something that we would like to do, provided we can find the right conditions. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this would put a marker down that we've got a construction cost estimate from a reputable company about, what would be involved in installing an elevator on the outside of a building. And those kinds of projects aren't rare, and they've actually happened inside the city recently. The idea of retrofitting a building with with an elevator. And just to point out, this elevator would be focused on the public access to the garage. So it would front directly onto Park Avenue, where the existing elevators in the building are, of course, designed to serve the building, which makes sense. And so this would be a public-facing elevator. And just like you said, Commissioner, this would be sort of the opening in the conversation with Kaiser about the public's interested in finding a way to invest in an elevator here. We'd need to work out the legal agreement of how it gets constructed and how that would either be sort of maintained, or is there some sort of payback provision? What does that look like?
Great, thank you. And then I just have a couple more things. I was really excited to see the pathways, the maintenance for and rebuilding of some of the pathways in the Rec and Parks items. I know that the pathway behind TJ is kind of a mess, and the one that runs along Trix Run. And I was just hopeful that maybe when we are looking to rebuild those, if they're in sort of more park-like settings, that we could look at perhaps some more environmentally friendly materials rather than just blacktop or asphalt. And then I just want to say that I think that the Berman Park renovation is really important to do from an equity angle that is closest to our largest affordable housing development in the city. And I was really glad to see that you noted that in the equity lens. I think those are exactly the kinds of things that lens should uncover. And oh, the only other question I have is I thought I saw mentioned somewhere in here and then I couldn't find it looking just now, but is there any sort of funding for a sidewalk program?
Yes, we are proposing, and it's called Streetlights and Sidewalks. We are proposing $150,000 per year for that. The FY21 funding will be predominantly used for the streetlights, and then we may need some residual to finish out the 1,100 lights that are in the city to get them to LED. But the core of that program would be ongoing to do sidewalks in the residential areas, because a lot of our grants, obviously for transportation, we can get walkability and pedestrian easier in those areas. We do need to work on and develop what does that program, how do we execute it, what's the balance of community engagement and neighborhood driven to where we know we have accessibility and safety issues. And your West Street example is a good one of how do you balance those policies of, I'll call city driven in a broad term, all of the key players and policymakers on the city side versus the neighborhood who has that sidewalk in front of them. But Zach, and I don't know if you all know, I serve as the city's ADA coordinator. Zach and I are regularly getting calls and issues of people who have mobility impairments and come out of their driveway and hit a utility pole. And to fix that, it needs to be city driven and kind of prioritized. And we actually have a very good ADA accessibility assessment that was back when Paul was just joining the city. We had done that, and Public Works has updated the GIS mapping. So we know where the issues are, but you can't just move one pole, and you got to address parking and you got to address stormwater. Those are challenges when you're doing the community engagement, but yet it should be community driven, sort of like the neighborhood traffic calming. But part of the NTC challenge has been getting consensus. And if we really want walkability as a policy and ADA and federal law compliance that we should have done since 1991, we may need a balance on those issues. So I think, one, we needed the LED lights. There was a good reason operationally for the cost recovery to switch to LED. That gives us time now to work on what does that sidewalk program look like. And I know both planning staff and public works staff are looking forward to, starting to frame that up and having that community engagement. And maybe if the chair's okay with it, I'll pause and see if Paul or Zach had anything to add, because that's a really important piece. That sidewalk will be one of the next visible projects we'll be executing that impacts our neighborhood.
Sure.
So I'll just defer to Paul or Zach if you have anything to add.
I can share some anecdotes. You mentioned the citywide pedestrian, bicycle, and traffic calming plan, which obviously a lot of effort went into, but ultimately there was no action on it. I remember, I think when I got my first phone in City Hall, I didn't have to sit at the end of the hallway anymore, and a phone came with the desk, which was pretty good. And I remember sort of, I don't know, maybe it was the week after sort of the decision was made at sort of the council and city manager's office level not to move forward with the plan. that's when I started getting phone calls from people asking when we were going to start implementation. So, there were certainly some issues to be worked out. As you said, there's always a balancing act of how you design a street and whether you're providing for trees or sidewalks or utilities or parking. How do you fit them all together? But I think that desire for sidewalks and pedestrian access and safety has never gone away in the city. So I think it is a good thing to see the program standing up with dedicated funds specifically for sidewalks. It doesn't have to be done as part of some other project. It's a project deserving of its own.
I agree. I only hope that the appetite for sidewalks grows. That's the goal, right? More sidewalks, more bikes, hopefully. I think that's it for me. One last thing, I just want to second Chair Rankin's comment about the Maple Avenue light becoming a full light. I live in the Greenway Downs neighborhood now, and it is like Frogger trying to cross South Washington Street. It's 5 lanes, there's no medians. I'm looking at the plans for the multimodal improvements on North Washington Street with some envy, and hoping that maybe we can have similar plans for South Washington Street. I know we are in the Greenway Downs, is outside of the POA or the small area plan, so I don't know. And I know there's about 29 groups. I know there's a lot cooking, but it's dangerous, and it would really be a big improvement, and I think would help support some of the businesses here. People on the Fairfax side will be able to more easily access, our side of that terrible road. So that's it for me. Thank you.
And that piece is really important, and certainly the intersection of South Washington and South Maple will be a good start. The neighborhood traffic calming program that we do have for Greenways Downs, which is $636,000 federal dollars, will help within the community. And Paul, I don't know if you want to highlight quickly, or we could do a follow-up with the commissioners a little bit about the Smart Scale grant that we applied, which would help with that crossing South Washington.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So, and I think it may have just been a timing issue in terms of which planning commission packet it went out in. But the city did submit an application for multimodal improvements in South Washington Street. I think Cindy, you mentioned it briefly. The stretch of the project runs. It sort of picks up at the end of the Washington and Maple project, and it runs at least as far out as Marshall. I think, and it's focused on the intersections and the crossings. So making sure that there are adequate crosswalks, adequate bus shelters, adequate lighting throughout the corridor. That is going up. VDOT has also recommended it. It was a grant application. VDOT staff has made a positive recommendation on the project. The VDOT recommendation will be going to the Commonwealth Transportation Board. And I think it would be helpful for the Planning Commission to send in a letter of support for that application, and certainly we're happy to work with the commission on that letter.
I would be happy to help draft it, and I will go back in the materials and find the description of that grant. I'm sorry I missed it. Very exciting. Thank you.
We'll forward it, because I can't remember which meeting it was and whether, the concept certainly evolved during the process. So I want to make sure you have the latest one.
Great. Thanks,
I see the grants manager, Caitlin Sopsey, has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you so much, Paul. I just wanted to add, Paul's correct that the grant application we submitted does make improvements to the intersection and the pedestrian crosswalks at Marshall. It adds a pedestrian refuge. We did have a hawk signal, one of the high intensity pedestrian beacon signals at Greenway in South Washington. And that was actually removed in the grant application verification process. VDOT didn't think that our traffic studies warranted a pedestrian signal there or a full traffic signal, because we also asked about that. So if we want to add a hawk pedestrian signal at Greenway or in other intersections along that that area, we would have to identify other funds other than the smart scale funds. And like Paul mentioned, we are going to be submitting comments to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and it probably wouldn't hurt for us to have support for that hawk signal that was removed, if that's something we still want to add.
Terrific, thank you.
And thank you, Caitlin, for that, and Paul. And this was a project that we've worked closely with Fairfax County on, both the staff, because obviously we know where the boundary line is there, as well as the Providence District Supervisor. And she's been very supportive of this concept. It's sort of a sea change with the coordination between the District Supervisor and walkability across. I will note one small other piece that isn't necessarily related to the walkability, but it is related to this project. And one of our concerns is VDOT has now determined that under smart scale, they won't pay for brick crosswalks and sidewalks. And so we've been trying to push back on that because we have adopted streetscape standards, and yet they're making a determination, and they've allowed it before. And part of the initial rationale was it costs more to maintain, and we're like, you're not maintaining them, the city is. So I just note that in case in your drafting you want to also comment on that. Fortunately, we have other localities concerned with that too, because there's a lot of localities who have formal historic districts. Ours is a streetscape standard, but the city of Alexandria isn't very happy if they can't have brick sidewalks in their historic district. So I'll just mention that as another issue as we go through the grant process. It's a good grant. And Caitlin, could you just remind me, and then it'll be in the packet, the year the funding would be available and the dollar amount?
FY26 is the year that it would be available, which means construction probably wouldn't be until at least FY28, and it is $6.4 million.
Thank you.
All right, thanks for all of those comments, very helpful. I know not everyone has to make a comment, but I know there's a couple of commissioners that haven't had a chance to comment. We technically have another 17 minutes before we have to vote to extend the meeting. Any other commissioners have comments about the CIP, questions? Because the goal is to take action tonight. Mr. Stevens.
Yeah, I wanted to add, propose that we add one additional item. It would be number 10 on the proposed motion. What it would do is kind of give a little bit of a boost to the planning process for converting the city's fleet vehicles to electric vehicles. So I kind of drafted it. It's a pretty simple and not at all a heavy lift, but it would be the Planning Commission recommends staff develop a plan for conversion of city vehicles to electric vehicles consistent with Chapter 5 of the city's comprehensive plan.
I would support that number 10. I suspect you wouldn't have any trouble adding that in, especially if you're the one who made the motion. Hint, hint. But
and I'm happy to do that if we're done with the discussion.
Yeah. I guess, this is the last call for comments. Otherwise, it sounds like Mr. Stevens is ready to make a motion.
Okay, well, I'll move that the Planning Commission recommend that the City Council approve pursuant to Section 6.19 of the City Charter and Section 17.08 of the City Code, the fiscal year 2022-2027 Capital Improvements Program is presented February the 3rd and 17th, 2021, as summarized on CIP notebook pages 3-1, 3-2, 3-3, 3-4, 3-5, 3-6, and 3-7, based on the following justifications. 1, CIP is consistent with the adopted comprehensive small area and master plans. 2, the city's capital infrastructure and reinvestment projects are developed holistically so that over time, the adopted policies, strategies, and action plans are implemented acknowledging that constrained resources require prioritization. 3, the CIP is enhanced through purposely planned and balanced reinvestment needs, funding options, and staff resources. 4, the CIP is fiscally responsive and compliant with adopted financial policies. 5, the CIP addresses long-term dedicated and sustainable funding for pay-as-you-go, local funding, for facility reinvestment and other capital needs to provide the fiscal balance of cash and debt financing. And 6, the CIP provides sufficient match funding to leverage grants to address significant transportation needs. Furthermore, number 7, to align ongoing operating costs for one-time capital infrastructure investment, the Commission requests staff finalize the operating cost calculator tool and that the resulting cost estimates be included in the city manager's proposed budget starting in fiscal year 2023. 8, the Commission recommends staff refine the equity lens diagnostic tool and make it a permanent criteria for the CIP development process starting in fiscal year 2023. 9, the Commission recommends staff develop an environmental impact plans to serve as another diagnostic tool for prioritizing CIP projects, timing and funding as of fiscal year 2023. And 10, the Planning Commission recommends staff develop a plan for conversion of city vehicles to electric vehicles consistent with Chapter 5 of the city's comprehensive plan.
All right. Thanks for that. And a second from Ms. Teets. And again, I forgot to check. We had public comment come in during our extensive discussion. So, Emily, did we?
No, you guys did not.
Keeping the streak alive. All right. Well, we have a motion and a second. Does anyone have any final comments before we vote?
I just want to make a quick comment to thank Ms. Mester and the staff for all the work they did. And I really appreciate the equity lens diagnostic tool. And I look forward to seeing an environmental impact lens next time. I think those will be very useful for us. So thank you.
I can second that for sure. A lot of work goes into this every year, and it's always impressive how put together it is. All right, seeing no additional comments, Ms. Bazemore, if you could call the vote, that'd be great.
Yes, Chair Rankin,
Yes.
Mr. Krasner,
Yes.
Ms. Teets,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Comat.
Yes.
All righty. Well, thank you to the CIP team. Appreciate you guys staying up late with us. But I think your job is done for this year for us.
Thank you for your time and commitment to the CIP. It's very important collaboration. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. All right, we've got like 12 minutes. I don't think we get through it all, but we could try. We've got January 27th minutes and February 3rd minutes. Anybody have any edits, updates, corrections to the minutes? And if not, I would entertain a motion to approve them, I guess, one at a time.
There was one small thing I noticed. I don't know if it matters, but I think in the February 3rd minutes, Mr. Krasner's amendment was classified as or characterized as unfriendly, but I think it was a friendly amendment. Paul might know.
I think technically it was unfriendly because, well, Paul can answer.
That's correct. It was an unfriendly amendment because it was not accepted. It had to go to vote to be accepted.
I see. Okay, so because right. Understood. Thank you. Just want to make sure that was.
Yeah, and for our audience out there, it was all quite friendly in real life, the technical terms. So, okay. Any other comments about the minutes?
Mr. Chair, I'll move that we approve the Planning Commission minutes of January 27th and February 3rd, 2021.
Sounds good. Can I get a second?
A second.
Second, Ms. Comat. Ms. Bazemore, quick vote call, please.
Yes, Chair Rankin,
Yes.
Mr. Krasner,
Yes.
Ms. Teets,
Yes.
Mr. Puentes,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens,
Yes.
Ms. Comat.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. On to information items. Number 7 on our agenda. Any planning commissioners reports? I don't know if a lot happened in the last 2 weeks, but Mr. Stevens, you've got something?
Yeah, I do. It's from the Architectural Advisory Board meeting. They were asked by the city staff team that's working on the City Hall to take a look at 3 options for a covered bike storage facility on the campus. And they provided their opinions on that, but they then went on to discuss some concerns with the fact that 3 parking spaces were proposed to be substituted with this bike parking facility. They questioned whether there was a need for a covered facility. And finally, they proposed that instead of it being in the parking lot, that some of the landscaping on the site be taken up and put the bike parking there. So I just mentioned this because I'm hoping that at some point we have an opportunity to respond and provide our own input on this facility. I thought the staff proposal was a good one, and I'd like to see if there's a way we can give them support.
All right, I might suggest maybe staff throws that on our agenda in the future. I don't know what the timing of that is, but.
Yeah, that can certainly be done. So the item that was before the AAB, this is a cleanup item on the site plan. So per the zoning ordinance requirements, the City Hall project did provide in the site plan for covered bicycle parking. The location that was shown on the approved site plan, it turns out is actually the location that the AAB was recommending. And I don't think they had the approved site plan in front of them. So they actually came independently to the same conclusion that you all had in terms of where that should best be located, which was currently it's a landscaped area on the corner of the building closest to Little Falls. The applicant, which in this case is the Department of Public Works, identified a couple concerns with that location. One was related to the sort of a swampiness of the area. The other and impacts that's having on the building, and then the other was the location of a dated, not dated as in old, but dated as in stamped cornerstone, marking I think one of the building additions or the original construction. And so the applicant had come forward looking for options to relocate the bike parking. Planning staff advised them of their options under the code to relocate and repurpose auto parking spaces. That I did get to go to the AAB because it does rise to the level of sort of an adjustment to the site plan, and the AAB usually weighs in on those kinds of things as well as the styling of structures. So that's sort of where the state of the conversation is. We can certainly schedule it for a planning commission work session to discuss it.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like we may or may not technically have specific purview, but it is something that we saw before. And I mean, I don't know the details, just heard Tim's explanation of it, but it is a little bit odd that the AAB is weighing in on parking spaces, but maybe I don't fully understand the realm of their influence. But yeah, I wouldn't be against at least just getting a brief update on that. And if we want to send a letter to somebody, we can always do that, right? So it sounds like we don't have a lot of authority. We could certainly provide our opinion. This is all right. Any other planning commission reports?
Before this meeting, I attended the first 30 minutes of an EDA special meeting tonight. They met to discuss acquiring one of the quads in Virginia Village, and they voted, I hear, unanimously to do so. So the city will now own, I mean, assuming all goes well, I suppose the city will own 2 of those units. And I think Atlantic owns 3 that are bordering full America. So that's great. It works out. And the League of Women Voters and CBC are holding an affordable housing forum, the first of 3, February 28th at 4 p.m. virtually. You're all invited if you would like to come. And that's it.
All right. Thanks for those updates. Yeah, I knew about that EDA meeting. My brother is the vice chair. He's right upstairs from me. So when I came in for this meeting, I could hear him yammering away up there about that item. But that's a good update. That's cool. The city can acquire some property. Always a good thing, in my opinion. Any other planning commission reports? All right. I assume everybody read the correspondence, which brings us to our director's reports. So Paul, here's the question. Can you get through it in 5 minutes, or do we vote to extend?
Yeah, I'm happy to give the report, and then depending on questions, we may want to extend.
Sounds good.
All right. So as usual, there's summary information in the report, and then there are attachments with more information. First update, this is courtesy of Principal Planner Carly Aubrey, who's the case planner for the West Falls Church project. Great leadership on her part to keep bringing this along. And she wanted to provide an update to the group, let you all know that the special exception entitlement amendment has come in, as well as the special exception site plan, new submissions of those materials. There's a city council work session scheduled for March 1st. There will be a daytime town hall, and then a planning commission work session March 17th would be the next time you all would be seeing that information. Green infrastructure concept. So I was very happy to accept an invitation to speak to the city's stormwater task force last week. And the topic they were discussing was green infrastructure. So they've made recommendations on the gray infrastructure projects, and those are underway. The group wanted to turn their attention to look at green infrastructure and whether they could get more benefits than purely stormwater management out of some of these things. And so they looked at how you would evaluate green infrastructure and what kinds of projects you ought to consider. I presented 3 options for them, and they're in the attachments. One was the idea of greening Lincoln Avenue, which the Planning Commission had previously seen. There's also a letter in your correspondence section from residents of Lincoln Avenue supporting that and asking that at least study efforts be funded as part of this year's CIP so that it could be coordinated with reconstruction of Lincoln Avenue. The other ideas I presented were restoring 4 Mile Run, which comes out of the city's North Washington Street Small Area Plan. And then the other idea was working street trees and bioswales, perhaps into the city's redevelopment standards, especially in single-family residential development, where there's often sort of land area to work with, whether that's in the public right-of-way or the private side of the property line. So I just wanted to share those same slides with you all. And then this last item, under the group's rules of procedures, one of the things you've sort of charged yourselves with is monitoring the city's planning budget. And so this is what I'm highlighting here is what's in the city's, the budget proposal for fiscal year 2022 on the operating side for us. Specific to planning, the budget proposal is $1.5 million, which funds 8.5 full-time planners, and then all other expenses that are not grant that are general fund, so they're not out of the tech fee, they're not out of grants. All of our other expenses total $34,000. Our major planned activities as a planning division for fiscal year 2022, top priority is going to be keeping development review moving forward. Continuing to seek and apply for grant applications, addressing council work plan items, and then continuing to support boards and commissions, coordinating regionally with other partners, and then taking on long-range planning. Long-range planning I listed last in this list. It's actually the sort of area where we're sort of weakest at the moment on staffing, not necessarily for skill set, but for workload. It didn't rise to the level of an unfunded need, but at the moment we have capacity to take on probably 1 comprehensive plan chapter or 1 small area plan per fiscal year. And there are no discretionary funds in our budget for other efforts or outside consultants. So if we want to take anything like that on and have it be planning led, we'd either be looking for technical assistance grants that are available or making use of any unspent year-end funds. The top unfunded needs we listed at the department level were more support at the permit counter, as well as more support for economic development. And it looks like what's going to be, this is all tentative information, but it looks like it will be possible to fund a permit counter position as well as a building inspector position out of application fees. The economic development position, specifically the downtown coordinator, is still something we're trying to find a funding solution for. That position is currently funded through a mix of EDA funds and the TOT tax, the transit occupancy hotel tax. We were able to cobble that together this year, and I think we'll try to come up with some funding mix for next year. But the request from our department anyway was to get that worked into the general budget. That is the conclusion of the director's report. Happy to take any questions.
My quick question is for that last item, trying to get funding for your team and stuff. Is that something that we should weigh in on now, or when the manager puts out his budget proposal? Or do we not need to weigh in? Do they don't care what we think about it? What's the?
I would think the time to weigh in would be after the draft budget is formally proposed to council. I think then there would be something concrete to respond to. At this stage, we're sort of in a weird spot, right, where departments have submitted their requests. The draft budget is coming together, but it hasn't formally been submitted yet. I think that happens in early March. So I think that would be, after that time would probably be the time to weigh in.
All right, we will keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
We're technically 2 minutes over, but it'd probably take us longer to vote to extend than it would to ask Paul any questions. So does anyone have any questions, comments, complaints? This is usually when we make our personal gripes about something wrong on our street, things like that. No, we're all good. Sweet. They're going to be out plowing tomorrow, right? Not that it matters because school happens anyway, apparently. It's pretty cool. Except for my special needs kid who won't go to school. That won't be as cool, but that's fine. We'll go make a snowman. All right. I guess that's it then. 10:32, not too bad. All right. Everyone stay safe in the crazy weather tomorrow. All right. Thanks, everybody. Meeting adjourned. Ka-chunk.
Thank you.
All right. See you.